In 1978, the landscape of horror changed forever with the release of John Carpenter's Halloween. Jumping off from a very simple premise, Carpenter crafted a vision of terror unlike anything that had been seen before. Though there were movies not unlike it prior to its release, Halloween's success would inspire a brand new subgenre, the slasher film. And while there have been many imitations, not to mention sequels and remakes, few horror movies have achieved the kind of glowing praise and reverence that the original Halloween has. Not to mention the fact that it introduced us to one of the most famous screen villains of all time, Michael Myers, the unstoppable killer without a conscience. The fact that this hugely successful thriller was made by a group of 20-something newcomers to the business further underlines how much of a once-in-a-lifetime sensation it was. So how did the boogeyman come to life? Well, grab some candy, or a knife, whatever's closest, because we're going to tell you what the f*** happened to John Carpenter's Halloween.
Hey, jerk! Speed kills!
Though Halloween is indeed the brainchild of John Carpenter and his co-writer/producer, Deborah Hill, the project didn't actually originate with them. The man we have to thank for setting things in motion is actually Irwin Yablans, then an independent producer and co-founder of Compass International Pictures. Irwin had seen Carpenter's hard-boiled siege flick Assault on Precinct 13 and was impressed by the filmmaking on display, even agreeing to help distribute it. Furthermore, he decided he wanted to be in the John Carpenter business and pitched the director an idea that had been floating around in his head about a psychopath who stalks a group of babysitters. Carpenter was just about finished shooting the TV movie Someone's Watching Me and had no plans after that. So he said, why not? The simple title for the project was The Babysitter Murders. Although in recent years, Yablans has disputed that that was ever going to be the actual title. But the producer eventually had one more notion, one that would change the movie's entire atmosphere. He was shocked to learn that hardly any horror movies up to that point had actually taken place during Halloween, supposedly the scariest night of the year. He was further surprised to find that the title Halloween had never been used. He said to Carpenter,
"Why don't we set it on Halloween night? In fact, why don't we just call it Halloween?"
The rest is history. Both Carpenter and Yablans were in agreement that the film should be suspenseful, but not gory. Yablans was particularly inspired by old horror programs that he would listen to on the radio as a kid, which in his mind were so scary because they played out vividly in your imagination, as opposed to showing you everything. He wanted the audience to be frightened, not repulsed. Carpenter had a few stipulations. He wanted to be paid $10,000 to write, direct, and compose the music. He wanted final cut, and he wanted his name above the title. While the latter was an unusual request for a relatively new director, Yablans told him that if he could make the film for $300,000, he could have anything he wanted. Carpenter brought aboard his then-girlfriend Deborah Hill, who he'd met during the making of Precinct 13, to be his co-writer and producer. Hill was integral to the formation of the screenplay. It was her responsibility to make the teenage girls at the center of the action sound authentic.
Totally.
Carpenter, on the other hand, focused on the grimmer aspects of the plot, using the idea of an unstoppable evil as the hook. Carpenter had also been inspired by Michael Crichton's Westworld, specifically the villainous robot played by Yul Brynner, who simply cannot be stopped no matter how many times he's shot or burned. This vision helped shape, pun intended, what would become the film's antagonist, Michael Myers. Carpenter and Hill cranked out the script in 2 to 3 weeks, and with the help of financier Mustafa Akkad, the film was greenlit with the $300,000 budget. However, they had a tight schedule to work with. It was already spring of 1978, and the idea was to get the film into theaters by Halloween, naturally. The production had approximately 20 days total to shoot, and they relied heavily on friends and local students to help out. In their late 20s at the time, Carpenter and Hill were just about the oldest people on the crew. Pasadena, California was going to stand in for Anytown, USA. And one of the main challenges for Carpenter and company was cropping out the palm trees, which would certainly look out of place in the Midwest. Another challenge that would be harder to overcome was the lush greenery of the surroundings. Since this was springtime in California, not autumn in Illinois, the popular story is that the production would use the same bags of leaves over and over, sprinkling them on the streets and sidewalks right before the shooting commenced, then gathering them up for the next shot. They would call the town Haddonfield, named after the town in New Jersey where Deborah grew up. In the matter of casting, Carpenter needed 3 wholesome American girls to play babysitters. He'd zeroed in on Anne Lockhart for the central role of Laurie Strode, but was persuaded by Deborah Hill to cast Jamie Lee Curtis instead. Curtis was, of course, Hollywood royalty, being the daughter of Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh. But at the time, she had only been in a handful of television shows, far from an above-the-title name. But Hill saw the potential in her backstory. Here was the daughter of Psycho's Marion Crane starring in a horror movie about a maniac with a knife. The headlines would write themselves. Casting Annie was fairly easy. Nancy Loomis was the wife of Carpenter's colleague Tommy Lee Wallace, and had a supporting role in Assault on Precinct 13. She was even a member of the costume department. For the role of the vapid Linda, Carpenter intentionally wrote it with PJ Soles in mind, since she'd played a similar part in Brian De Palma's Carrie. Soles landed the gig and only later discovered that Carpenter wrote it for her specifically. To play Linda's boyfriend Bob, Carpenter asked Soles' then-husband Dennis Quaid, but he wasn't available to do it, so John Michael Graham was chosen instead. To portray the very formidable character often known as The Shape, Carpenter called upon his friend Nick Castle, who one day had idly asked the director if there was anything he could do to help. Carpenter essentially said,
"Yes, you can be the killer.
Carpenter gave Castle no direction other than,
Just walk."
but the actor did eventually add one of Meyer's signature moments, when he looks upon his victim like a curious dog would a treat. For his work, Castle was paid just $25 a day. The final piece in the puzzle was the small but crucial role of Dr. Sam Loomis, Michael's psychiatrist and eventual hunter. Carpenter knew he needed a name for this part, someone recognizable who could give Loomis the gravitas needed to sell the idea that his former patient is the walking embodiment of evil. Carpenter first went to Peter Cushing, the legendary British thespian known best for his work in Hammer horror movies playing Van Helsing and Dr. Frankenstein. But Cushing had just made Star Wars, the biggest movie of all time, and had no time for Halloween and its small salary. Carpenter then looked towards Cushing's longtime collaborator, Christopher Lee, but Lee turned them down flat. Deborah Hill would later say that she bumped into Lee at a convention years later where he confessed that turning down Halloween was the biggest mistake of his career. If that's true, we'd argue that The Howling 2, Your Sister is a Werewolf is a close second. Erwin Yablon suggested Donald Pleasance, who'd made an impression playing villains in You Only Live Twice, and in particular the Charlton Heston western Will Penny. But he'd also played heroes in films like The Great Escape, so we could lend Halloween a character who seemed believably intense and ready for action. Pleasance was offered $20,000 for 5 days of work, but the story goes that he really took the part because his daughter had been a big fan of Assault on Precinct 13 and encouraged him to do it. Pleasance and Carpenter didn't always get along, with the former often pushing the director's buttons. In one instance, Pleasance flat out refused to say Carpenter's dialogue. When Loomis calls Haddonfield to warn them that Michael is coming, right before he finds the abandoned truck, he was also meant to call his wife at home and reassure her he's okay. But Pleasance rejected that idea, insisting Loomis should have no personal life or past. Carpenter, too insecure to contradict the veteran actor, agreed with him and cut the dialogue. Though Pleasance's salary was considerable, a more significant amount of money was going to another key player in the film: the camera. Carpenter knew the film would have to look great in order to make up for the low budget, so he decided to use the Panaglide camera rig to give it a professional, sleek look. More commonly known as a Steadicam, The Panaglide enabled the camera department to move freely for long, unbroken takes, and it was much easier than using a dolly with its cumbersome tracks. Halloween would use the Panaglide to great effect throughout, but its biggest contribution came during the terrific opening sequence of the film, which looks like one unbroken take of our villain preparing to kill, but it's actually two separate takes because they could only shoot for about 4 minutes at a time. But the effect is still brilliant. Incidentally, that sequence was the last to be filmed during principal photography because the house itself had to be dressed and painted to look like a normal suburban home. It was chosen because the filmmakers had found it in a state of disrepair. The scene where we meet Laurie and she approaches the house is what it actually looked like. Perfect for the film's needs of displaying the Myers house as completely dilapidated. So when it came time to shoot the scene where a young Michael stalks his sister, the team had to spliff it up to look like a normal home. Hence, waiting until the very end of the shoot to film that critical sequence. One aspect of the film that you likely already know is the legend of the mask itself. Described in the script as being made of rubber and having the grotesque features of a man, there was plenty of leeway in terms of what it could actually look like. It was up to Tommy Lee Wallace, the film's production designer and eventual editor, to find the perfect one. Wallace received 2 masks from a magic shop on Hollywood Boulevard, a sad clown mask and a Captain Kirk mask. The clown mask spoke for itself, but Wallace had to modify the Kirk mask a bit. He shaved the eyebrows and sideburns, cut the eye holes wider, spray painted it white, and dyed the hair darker. Once everyone saw the mask, they flipped for it. One of Carpenter's inspirations for such a blank palette was the thriller Eyes Without a Face, which definitely has one of the creepiest masks in history. Carpenter would later say that despite the low budget, the shoot was a relatively easy one, but there was still much to do in the short time that they had until its release, presumably in October. The score would turn out to be incredibly important to the film, and while the story goes that Carpenter knocked it out in just 3 days, Deborah Hill is on record saying he already had the theme in his mind much earlier on during the writing process. Apparently, Carpenter would play the ominous theme for Hill while they were working to help inspire them. The music is credited to the Bowling Green Philharmonic Orchestra, a shout out to Bowling Green, Kentucky, where he grew up. When Halloween was completed, Irwin Yablans held a screening for all of the major studios in the hopes of getting one of them interested in distributing it. Problem was, none of the studios showed up. Yablans was going to fall back on his past as a marketer and distributor and get the film in theaters himself. His first stop would be Kansas City, Missouri, where the film performed admirably, allowing him to take it elsewhere. Fortunately for Yablans, his business partner Joe Wolf had a relationship with MGM Studios, who was willing to make around 400 prints of Halloween, allowing the distributors to start getting a little wider with their little movie. Initially, the reviews were not kind, with most critics dismissing the film as artless and shallow. But soon the tide began to turn. First, a glowing review from the New York Village Voice, then a couple from famed Chicago critics Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert, the latter of whom compared it to, you guessed it, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Soon enough, critics who waved the movie away at first began to reevaluate Halloween, happily coinciding with the movie taking off at theaters and racking up big returns. Ultimately, Halloween ended its theatrical run with over $70 million worldwide, making it the most successful independent feature of all time at that point. Of course, you know the rest. Halloween spawned a plethora of imitators, and the early 80s saw a horror boom unlike any that had come before. Naturally, the massive success of Halloween necessitated a sequel be made. Carpenter and Hill begrudgingly wrote it after realizing that it would be made with or without them, also letting the substantial paycheck help convince them. Carpenter is on record saying Budweiser got him through the writing of that script, as they struggled to find reasons to justify its existence. With the completion of David Gordon Green's recent Halloween trilogy, there are currently 13 movies in the franchise, though of course making sense of the timeline can be a little tricky. What's obvious is, there's money to be made off that blank-faced, unkillable monster, and when a new Halloween film is inevitably announced, none of us should be surprised. After all,
You can't kill the boogeyman.
After Halloween was a huge hit, it was only a matter of time before another one was made. Even though he tried to pass on being involved, John Carpenter would end up being tasked with writing, producing, and even directing some scenes during reshoots. What ends up becoming Halloween 2 would actually cause problems with the series for its entire run. Just about every contrived plot point in the series can be drawn back to this movie, except for that whole, Cult of Thorn thing, which we will dig into in its own episode of What the F*** Happened to This Horror Movie. While this movie does often get overlooked in the rankings of the series, it does offer some interesting things. But the road to get there was fraught with problems behind the camera. With Halloween 2018's reset, we are now seeing an alternate reality where Laurie Strode didn't go to the hospital and have to fight off Michael Myers once again. Could the entire series, up until the 2018 film, just be a fever dream of a young Laurie Strode while recuperating in the hospital? Her vivid imagination playing all sorts of tricks on her? Even reimagining it a couple of times? But for now, let's go back to Haddonfield Memorial Hospital and find out what the f*** happened to Halloween 2. I want to thank you guys for watching What the F*** Happened to This Horror Movie, and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now, like this video, and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show. In Halloween 2, we open with the events from the end of the first film. Michael has been shot 6 times and falls off the balcony only to disappear. Weirdly, in the original film, we hear 6 shots. While at the beginning of this film, we hear 7. Loomis, though, confirms he shot him 6 times, as told by his frantic interaction with the police.
I shot him 6 times! I shot him 6 times! I shot him 6 times!
I shot him 6 times!
He has obviously lost it by this point. His calm demeanor has been thrown away, and he is in full-blown panic mode. As much credit as Donald Pleasance gets for his first portrayal as the Good Doctor in Part 1, his descent into a more frantic and exposed character in the sequel is impressive and should get more praise than it does. Meanwhile, Laurie is taken to Haddonfield Memorial Hospital. There we meet a colorful crew of hospital staff. Laurie is sedated and spends the rest of the film in a hazy dream state. While out walking around town feeling good about himself, Michael runs into a boy listening to a boombox that I totally wanted when I was a kid. Jealousy is not a good look for me. But Michael learns about Laurie's whereabouts during a news report on the radio and makes his way to the hospital to finally finish what he started. While out chasing down Michael, Dr. Loomis ends up at a grade school that had been broken into. There he finds the word Sam Hain written in blood on the chalkboard. He also mispronounces it, as it should be Samhain.
Sam Hain. It means the Lord of the Dead.
But he's a bit preoccupied at the moment, so we'll give him a pass. It's also here that the nurse from the first movie shows up to drop an exposition bomb on the Good Doctor. It's here that we find out Laurie is actually adopted and is Michael's sister. With this, Loomis heads off to the hospital, where he finds Michael has gone on another killing spree while Laurie has stumbled around all doped up and had flashes of the fact that she sort of knew she was Michael's sister all along. Everything culminates in an explosive finale that kills off both Loomis and Michael for good. And the confirmation needed is the flame shooting out of Michael's skull. Dead is dead. Well, it was supposed to be anyway, but we're about to see the 12th movie in the franchise hit theaters, so yeah. John Carpenter had no interest in returning to the Halloween franchise, but when someone suggested he should stay on as producer, he looked at it as a way to get some of the money he felt he was owed from the original movie, while also helping a young filmmaker get started in the business, as the first film had done for him. He was tasked with writing the film, and he really had no idea where to go. He decided to set it on the same night as the first film. Start with the mystery of where Michael ended up after he fell off the balcony. After a while, he became stuck and didn't know how to proceed. One of the ideas was to set the film in a high-rise apartment building. Eventually, it was changed to the hospital setting. After NBC had picked up the broadcast rights for the first film, they had requested a few additional scenes to fill out the time slot. While thinking about what he could add, Carpenter claims that at 2 a.m, thanks to a 6-pack of beer, he came up with the idea that Laurie was Michael's sister. This lent to something motivating Michael in the second film, as well as gave Carpenter some fodder to use for the extra scenes for the original film. He says Vader's twist in The Empire Strikes Back influenced him to do this. Carpenter has said that was a horrible decision and has helped ruin the rest of the franchise. Who can argue with him? It has caused problems anytime a new movie has been made. When they were working on part 4, they had to work around the fact that Jamie Lee Curtis wasn't going to return, so they gave her an off-screen death and an orphan daughter, or abandoned if you take into account that Laurie claimed to have faked her death in H2O. In part 6, he is chasing down his possibly incestuously fathered baby. In H2O, he's back after his miraculously revived sister. In Resurrection, we find out his brother is Busta Rhymes. Okay, not really, but it'd still be better than what we got. This familia connection has plagued the series ever since Carpenter himself said, quote, "The brother thing was awful, just awful." But here we are. With the script written, Carpenter then turned to Tommy Lee Wallace to direct the film. Wallace had been a production designer and editor on the first film. He was excited about it, as he had some ideas of his own for what a sequel should be. Once Carpenter handed him the script, his excitement fell. After the first film, the slasher boom had started to take effect. All of these films seemed to revel in the excitement of upping the blood and nudity to pull in audiences. To be fair, it worked. Wallace was hoping to keep the slow-moving, blood-free approach to the film like they used in the first one. He rejected the offer to direct, but would come back to direct Halloween 3.
Where Halloween got it done with suggestion and shadows and true old-school suspense technique. Somehow to me, Halloween 2 was summed up with that like hypodermic in the eyeball.
With this, Carpenter had to find another director, and Rick Rosenthal was hired. One of the criticisms of this film is that Michael looks so different. There are varying stories as to why the mask itself looks different. Some say that Nick Castle would shove the mask in his pocket between takes on the original movie. This would have caused the white spray paint to begin to come off, revealing the flesh color underneath, giving it a weird yellow effect. Another story is that Deborah Hill had put the mask into a box and stored it under her bed after the first movie. She was an avid smoker, and the years of exposure to cigarette smoke yellowed it. On top of this, Dick Warlock was brought in to play the Shape this time around, after scaring director Rick Rosenthal. Warlock saw the mask and put it on, and then stood unmoving in Rosenthal's office. He didn't speak when asked who he was multiple times by the director. When he took off the mask, he asked if he could play the part, and the director hired him. While he had the attitude down, he was actually smaller in stature than Nick Castle. He wore lifts to try to make himself seem taller, but the mask still didn't fit the same way it had on Castle. This led to the character appearing slightly off in this film. When Jamie Lee Curtis signed on to the movie, it was noted that she had cut her hair closer to the shorter hairstyle she has become famous for. She ended up having to wear a wig for the movie. In various shots, you can see that her hair seems to be different. While this normally could just be chalked up to it being a few years between films, this time it was because of the wig. Both Michael and Laurie seem off in this movie. Maybe this lends credence to my dream theory. Hashtag Laurie's Dream Theory. One piece of trivia you can use to impress your friends is that Jamie Lee Curtis has played Laurie Strode in 6 different decades. Halloween in 1978, Halloween 2 in 1981, Halloween H2O 20 years later in 1998, Halloween Resurrection in 2002, Halloween 2018, and Halloween Kills 2021. When Rick Rosenthal turned in his cut, John Carpenter was not impressed.
On the other hand, I think Halloween 2 is an abomination and a horrible movie. I was really disappointed in it. And but I don't think the director has gone on and done some other films. I think his career is launched now. But I don't think he had a feel for the material. I think that's the problem. He didn't have a feeling for what was going on.
He called it about as scary as an episode of Quincy M.E. Carpenter took to re-editing the film to up the tension and showcase more of the kills. He even went back and shot some new scenes and inserts to make the film even gorier than before. It's a good thing Tommy Lee Wallace decided to pass. With a higher body count, more blood, and some nudity, Carpenter felt it had a better shot at making money at the box office. Rosenthal was livid at this and has been very outspoken about it. He would get another shot at Michael Myers with Halloween Resurrection. It didn't help his case any. One thing Carpenter did leave in was Dana Carvey's excellent appearance as a new assistant. While it does have its fair share of detractors, the film does have some good points. Even though it moved away from the more subtle and blood-free storytelling, some of the kills in the film make it fun. The nurse getting scalded in the hot tub is gruesome and looks great. Apparently, she got an ear infection from the not-so-clean water. Gross. The scalpel in the back always makes my stomach drop, even if the lifting of the nurse in the air makes no sense. But the saddest death in the whole film has to be the young man that was mistaken for Michael Myers and rammed with a police car. Turns out, that is the boy that Laurie has a crush on, Ben Tramer. Man, she not only lost all of her friends, but also her hopeful future boyfriend. Laurie has had a rough life. No wonder she was an alcoholic in H2O. While Michael would go on to stalk more family members in other films, this was the one that gave us his connection to Laurie Strode. For better or worse, this entry would influence every Halloween film that came after it. Even if you're not a fan of the twist, you have to agree that this is all a dream in Laurie's head up until the 2018 reboot. I'm making this happen whether you like it or not. Hashtag Laurie's Dream Theory.
Has any horror movie in history undergone as drastic a reassessment than Halloween 3? As we all know, when it first came out in 1982, it was met with confusion and disparagement from critics and moviegoers alike. Most were expecting another entry in the Michael Myers saga, and instead got a creepy, bleak movie about a warlock's intention to kill as many children as possible on October 31st, thanks to rigged Halloween masks and, Stonehenge or something? The hell did that have to do with the last two movies called Halloween? Only several years later did horror fans begin their reevaluation of the movie. If you accept it as its own thing, which of course it is, it's a pretty nifty, spooky little thriller with a handful of very memorable sequences, some terrific performances, and of course, a suitably downbeat finale that flies in the face of the usual happy endings that we were used to being force-fed to us. So how in the name of Sanheim did this get made? It's almost time, kids. Don't forget to wear your masks and tune in for the big giveaway as we reveal what the happened to Halloween 3, Season of the Witch.
Mr. Kupfer was right, you know. I do love a good joke, and this is the best ever. A joke on the children.
After writing and producing Halloween 2, franchise creators John Carpenter and Deborah Hill were burnt out on the shape, Michael Myers. The experience of making the sequel was not a positive one for them, but the film made money, naturally the only thing that matters to producers, so a third Halloween film became inevitable. As they had on the second movie, Carpenter and Hill reasoned that if they weren't involved, the producers would just go get someone else to come up with a new one, so they begrudgingly agreed to be part of the third chapter. With one small, make that pretty big caveat. This new film would have nothing at all to do with Michael Myers. Instead, Carpenter and Hill wanted to create an anthology of sorts under the banner of Halloween, which would allow them to make a new, unique horror movie that took place around the holiday every year. The suits actually agreed to this quirky new request, and Carpenter and Hill set out to make the first in what they thought was going to be a cool anthology franchise that would last years and years. To direct the film, Carpenter reached out to Joe Dante, then known for Piranha and The Howling. Dante initially agreed to direct, but was eventually tempted away by one Mr. Steven Spielberg, who approached him to helm a segment in Twilight Zone the movie. Before leaving, however, Dante had brought in a writer to work on Halloween 3, a famed British and sci-fi horror author named Nigel Neal, perhaps best known for the Quatermass Experiment TV series and films. Neal was admittedly not a fan of the first two Halloweens, nor the slasher genre in general, but the opportunity to craft a unique horror movie that dealt with witchcraft certainly appealed to him, so he agreed to work with Carpenter and Hill on the project. Hill's idea was to blend the world of witchcraft with the modern age of computers, so Neal came up with the concept of an evil warlock who wants to sacrifice the world's children on Halloween night using a chilling cocktail of advanced technology and ancient spells. The overall story of the Halloween 3 that we know today was all Neal's plotting, and eventually director Tommy Lee Wallace has claimed that Neal deserves credit for approximately 60% of the script. Not that he wanted that much credit, or any credit to be precise. After his initial drafts were thought to be too stuffy, too dour, too British, Neal bristled at the notion of rewriting his work to make it more palatable. According to the author, word came down on high that the movie needed to be more violent, more targeted to the youth of America, which his British sensibilities simply couldn't compute. Neal eventually left the project and requested that his name not show up in any of the credits, but the structure he left behind gave the existing creative team something to work with. Enter the aforementioned Tommy Lee Wallace. Wallace was a longtime friend and collaborator of John Carpenter's, having been both editor and production designer on both Halloween and The Fog. He was, in fact, in line to direct Halloween 2 at one point, but he hated the script so much that he refused to be a part of it. Once Joe Dante jumped out of the director's chair for the third film, however, the duo went back to their old friend Tommy, offering him the chance to direct their new Halloween, with the understanding that The Shape was being left behind, and an all-new story was in the works. With that aspect of it appealing to him, Wallace came on board to direct his first feature film, which was budgeted at around $2.5 million. Carpenter rewrote a good chunk of Nigel Neal's script, bringing in some more violence and gore before handing it off to Wallace, who did his own rewriting on it. The film already had a green light by the time he came on board, so Wallace didn't have a ton of time to prepare, getting only a few weeks to cast and crew up the film before shooting began. His film was going to be more of a pod people movie than a slasher. According to producers at the time, Wallace's main influence was clearly the 1955 classic Invasion of the Body Snatchers, with its emphasis on paranoia rather than scares. In fact, the creepy corporate town at the center of Halloween 3 is called Santa Mira, which is the name of the main location in Body Snatchers. The ending thoroughly pays homage to the black and white thriller as well, but we'll get to that in a minute. For their leading man, the producers went to an old friend, Tom Atkins. Having worked with Carpenter and Hill on The Fog and Escape from New York, Atkins was like family to the pair, and of course, also knew Wallace very well too. Wallace loved Atkins' grizzled charm, the fact that he wasn't a pretty boy or typical movie star, but a believable blue-collar type who audiences would gravitate towards. I mean, who wouldn't gravitate towards that stash? The producers had a difficult time casting the role of Ellie Grimbridge, the heroine of the piece. Evidently, they were down to the wire, only 2 weeks to go before production, and they still hadn't found the right actress. At the time, a makeup artist on the film was friends with actress Stacey Nelkin and asked if she'd consider auditioning. She was hesitant to do so for a while, not being a fan of the genre, but her agent eventually convinced her to go read for the part. She auditioned and got the role later that day. To play the evil Connell Cochran, the production cast Daniel O'Herlihy, a legendary stage and screen actor who'd later be best known for his role in the first 2 RoboCop movies. Casting him was evidently Deborah Hill's idea. While he is phenomenal in the movie, O'Herlihy would later admit that he didn't think much of the film after seeing it. But like everyone else, maybe he just needed to reassess it. The other crucial members of the cast would be the deadly Halloween masks themselves. These were provided by legendary mask maker Don Post, who actually created the William Shatner mask that famously became the Michael Myers mask that we all know and love. The skull and witch masks were already in existence, but the jack-o'-lantern mask was made especially for the film. Post even let the production shoot in his warehouse, so the sequences in Halloween 3 within the mask factory are set in the actual place that Post made his fortune. In return for providing the masks and location, Post didn't ask for money, he asked for merchandising rights to the masks, which were mass-produced in conjunction with the film's release. The majority of the movie was shot in Loleta, a sleepy town in Northern California with a population of only a few hundred people. The town's main industry was its milk factory, and the exterior of said factory serves as the facade of Connell Cochran's Warehouse of Horrors. Cast and crew would later relate that shooting in the little town was definitely an unsettling experience, as they always felt the townspeople were creepily watching them from behind curtains. Ironically, when the film was first announced in Variety, it was stated that there would be no gore, no violence, no knives. Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, because as we all know, the film had a handful of extremely unpleasant scenes, including the death of Marge Gutman, who was played by Tom Atkins' real wife at the time, and the very unfortunate demise of little Buddy Kupfer, whose head melts into an unseemly stew of insects, reptiles, and melted mask. The demise of the Kupfer family was in Nigel Neal's original script, but was not close to as graphic as Wallace's version, as the director wanted to call upon some biblical plague imagery to hammer home just how insidious Cochran's plot really is. Apparently, once the crickets were unleashed from little Buddy's head, the production had a hell of a time chasing them all down, and the chirping of crickets could be heard for weeks from all around the studio. Those poor sound guys. As for the thing that the film is best known for, that was created thanks to good old lack of funds. There was no money in the budget to hire a firm to create them an ad, so Wallace went ahead and did it himself. He used London Bridge as a base because he knew that it was in the public domain, hence no rights issues to worry about, and he even hired himself to do the unforgettable "It's time" voiceover. They had no idea the song would become a cult classic in its own right years down the line.
Stop it! Stop it!
Another trademark of the film is its pessimistic, ambiguous ending. Another callback to Invasion of the Body Snatchers' famous finale, although without the tacked-on happy ending. Distributor Universal Pictures was unhappy with the conclusion, thinking it was too dark and unsatisfying, so they asked Carpenter if he could persuade Wallace to change it. But Carpenter stuck by his friend and used his clout to convince the studio that the downbeat ending wouldn't be going anywhere. Though Wallace eventually admitted that it was perhaps because of the ominous conclusion that the movie didn't do better. When the film was released on October 22, 1982, Halloween 3 was having trouble marketing what it actually was. The poster made it clear no Michael Myers appearances were forthcoming, but audiences were still apparently under the impression that the shape would figure into this new installment somehow. Once the cat was out of the bag, however, the film's box office legacy was cemented. While it opened well enough to the tune of $6 million, it only wound up making $14 million total in the United States. Compare that to the $34 million Friday the 13th Part 3 made earlier that summer, and the writing was on the wall. Audiences were not fond of this new direction for the Halloween franchise. Naturally, the people involved were gutted, especially Tommy Lee Wallace, who admits to being truly crestfallen by the reception the film received. Not only did it immediately kill any future plans for the anthology idea that they'd all had, but the movie was dismissed so harshly by the public that Wallace thought he might never work again afterward. Only many years later would it become obvious that Halloween 3 had been enjoying something of a second life, with a new generation appreciating its bold, grim narrative. Now sit down and put your masks on, kids. It's almost time for the big giveaway. Sing it with me now.
8 more days to Halloween, Halloween, Halloween. 8 more days to Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
Making a Halloween 3 without iconic slasher Michael Myers hadn't worked out very well.
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
The plan had been to turn Halloween into an anthology series, but that plan went down in flames. Fans were disappointed. The Halloween franchise was tarnished so badly, major studios didn't want to touch it. Michael Myers needed to come back for Halloween 4, and the filmmakers had to make sure his return was a triumphant one. And they did, which is why we're still getting Michael Myers movies to this day. How did they accomplish their mission? Let's find out on this episode of What the F*** Happened to This Horror Movie. Mustafa Akkad provided the $300,000 budget for Halloween, which turned out to be a great investment. Halloween was a huge hit. So of course, everyone wanted a sequel. Everyone except Carpenter and Hill. They wanted to focus on original projects, but Halloween 2 did present a chance for them to make some money, and they were still owed some cash from the first movie. So they agreed to make a sequel. Legendary producer Dino De Laurentiis had been very impressed by Halloween, so he bought his way into Halloween 2 and got the project set up at a major studio, Universal Pictures. Carpenter has been very open about the fact that he found it difficult to write the script for Halloween 2. He realized there wasn't any story left to tell, so he just had Michael Myers continue going after Laurie Strode on Halloween night, 1978. Carpenter was so desperate to get some kind of substance into the story, he even dropped in a twist, which he now regrets. A twist that reveals the acts that appeared to be random in the first movie weren't random at all. Michael was specifically targeting Laurie because she is his long-lost sister, and he wants to kill her just like he killed their other sister in 1963.
That girl, that Strode girl, that's Michael Myers' sister.
He tried to make sure he would never have to worry about Michael Myers again by having both the slasher and Dr. Loomis get caught in an explosion. There's no way they'd be coming back from that.
Jimmy been suspended 5 times this year already for getting a little crazy with the stick, all right?
But Halloween 2 was a hit, and Dino De Laurentiis had it in his contract that he could produce another sequel. Carpenter and Hill agreed to shepherd Halloween 3 to the screen, but not as a Michael Myers slasher movie. That story really was over now. Their idea was to turn Halloween into an anthology franchise, a series of movies that would only be connected by the fact that they're set on Halloween. The first movie's production designer, Tommy Lee Wallace, was hired to direct and rewrite a script that was written by the uncredited Nigel Neal. The result was The Madness of Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, the story of a toy maker who harnesses the power of Stonehenge to turn Halloween masks into deadly weapons. Halloween 3 is considered a cult classic now, but it made substantially less at the box office than its predecessors had. Fans were not happy to receive a Halloween movie without Michael Myers in it. Halloween 3 marked the end of the deal with Dino De Laurentiis and Universal, and after seeing their anthology idea fail, Carpenter and Hill were done with Halloween as well. But they weren't the only ones making decisions for the franchise. Yablans and Akkad were both still rights holders as well, and they continued pushing for another sequel, one that would get the series back on track. Halloween was a lucrative property. They couldn't just sit on it. But years went by without Carpenter or Hill showing any interest in making a sequel, and the rights holders all had to be in agreement to get a new movie into production. Then Canon Films offered Carpenter a multi-film deal with the condition that one of the movies he'd make for them would be Halloween 4. So he took the deal and hired Dennis Etchison, who had written the novelizations for Halloween 2 and 3 under the name Jack Martin, to write the script. They knew Michael Myers would have to be brought back in order for the film to be a success. The question was, how could he return? Etchison's idea was to turn Michael Myers into a supernatural force. The human side of him was dead, burned away, but the evil spirit that lived within him was still around. It feeds on fear and is brought back into the world because the adults of Haddonfield are still so afraid of Michael Myers. They banned Halloween after what happened in 1978. But as the 10th anniversary approaches, their kids are desperate to celebrate the holiday again. An all-night horror movie marathon is set up at a drive-in just outside of town, and that event is crashed by the supernatural version of Michael Myers, who wears a black t-shirt and a black coat instead of the usual coveralls. Carpenter worked closely with Etchison as he wrote multiple drafts of his script, full of strange events and trippy nightmare sequences. He contacted the Howling director, Joe Dante, about taking the helm. There was a chance Halloween 4 was going to start filming in April of 1987. But while Carpenter was happy with the approach Etchison had taken, there were others who were not.
No! 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 No!
Namely, Yablans and Akkad. They wanted Michael Myers back, but without this supernatural baggage. They wanted him to be a flesh and blood killer like he was in the first two movies, so they blocked Etchison's version of Halloween 4 from happening. That was the last straw for Carpenter and Hill. They decided to sell off their stake in the franchise, and their share was purchased by Akkad, who also bought Yablin's share of the rights. Akkad was now in complete control, and a Halloween 4 that would be more along the lines of the first film in the series was on the fast track. At this point, 5 years after the release of Halloween 3, Hollywood studios didn't have any interest in producing or distributing a new sequel, so Akkad would produce and distribute Halloween 4 himself through his company, Trancas International. An open call was put out for story pitches. Anyone could bring a Halloween 4 idea to Trancas, whether they were in the Writers Guild or not. Submissions came pouring in, as revealed in the book Taking Shape 2, The Lost Halloween Sequels by Dustin McNeil and Travis Mullins. One script that was submitted had Michael Myers going after Laurie Strode in Chicago. That script, by Daniel Keeney and Mac Allen Medina, found that Laurie was married and had a daughter. She was working for a magazine, putting together an article on a famous rock star, and when Michael returns, he kills the rock star, steals the leather outfit from his closet, and goes joyriding in his Porsche. That script was rejected because Jamie Lee Curtis wouldn't be reprising the role of Laurie Strode. The winning script was sent in by Dahani Lipsis, Larry Ratner, and Benjamin Ruffner. Those writers delivered exactly the sort of setup Akkad wanted to see, a sequel that would echo Halloween 1. This time, Michael Myers would escape from a sanitarium 10 years after the events of the first two films. And since Laurie has passed away, his new target would be her young daughter. Dr. Loomis would once again be on Michael's trail. Akkad was confident that the Lipsis, Ratner, and Ruffner script was a solid foundation for Halloween 4. It just needed a bit more work. Playwright Shem Bitterman was hired to do a rewrite of the script, and Bitterman brought some twisted ideas to the table. In his version of the script, Michael's niece isn't afraid of him. She thinks he's misunderstood and wants to play and bond with her uncle. Like the script written by Kenny and Medina, this one had Michael pairing his iconic mask with a wardrobe change. But in this case, his stolen clothes were from a priest who picked him up hitchhiking. In the finished film, it's Dr. Loomis who gets a ride from a man of God. Bitterman's revision didn't make it to the screen, but he would get another chance when he was hired to work on Halloween 5 the following year. Some of the ideas he originally had for Part 4 did end up in the next sequel. The job of directing Halloween 4 went to Dwight H. Little, who was a fan of the franchise and had his agent pursue the gig for him. Little's movies, KGB, The Secret War, and Getting Even hadn't made much of an impact, but he had just finished filming an action-adventure movie called Bloodstone. He was able to bond with Akkad over that one, because it reminded Akkad of a film he had made himself, The Lion of the Desert. Little also had the vision Akkad wanted for Halloween 4. He wanted to try to bring back the style and tone of the first movie, while also making sure the film would have the proper Halloween atmosphere. Little was from Ohio, so he knew exactly how Midwestern Halloween should look and feel on screen. He wasn't satisfied with the Lipsis, Ratner, and Ruffner script, though. It's not clear if he ever saw the Bitterman drafts, but he knew who he wanted to have work on the script: his friend and fellow Ohioan, Alan B. McElroy. McElroy was hired to rewrite Halloween 4 on February 25, 1988, and he was in a tough spot. Not only was the movie set to start filming in April, but the Writers Guild was going to go on strike as of March 7. As a member of the Guild, McElroy wouldn't be able to work on the script past that date, so he knocked out his version of the script in just 11 days. His rewrite was so substantial, he received the sole screenwriting credit on the finished film, and also shares story credit with Lipsis, Ratner, and Ruffner. As far as Carpenter was concerned, Michael Myers was burned down to ash at the end of Halloween 2. But Halloween 4 tells us that he made it out of the hospital alive. He was so severely burned that he has been in a coma for the last 10 years. In that time, Laurie Strode has gotten married and had a daughter named Jamie. Sadly, Laurie and her husband were both killed in a car accident around the end of 1987. Jamie, who is said to be 7 years old, now lives in Haddonfield with the Carruthers family and has a teenage foster sister named Rachel. It's common knowledge that Jamie is the niece of the infamous Michael Myers. She's teased and bullied at school for being an orphan, and the fact that her uncle is the boogeyman. Although she shouldn't know what her uncle looked like while he was wearing a mask and carrying a knife, she has reoccurring nightmares about him. She calls him the Nightmare Man, but as Halloween 1988 approaches, she wants to celebrate the holiday like any other kid in town. She wants Rachel to take her trick-or-treating, since her parents will be attending a party that night. And when it's time to get a costume, she just happens to pick a clown costume, like Michael was wearing when he killed his sister in 1963. Unfortunately, Michael returns to ruin Jamie's holiday fun. The head of the Ridgemount Sanitarium he has been in for 10 years decided Halloween Eve would be the perfect time for a patient transfer. He's sending Michael back to Smith's Grove, the sanitarium he escaped from in 1978. But in the midst of the transfer, the medics make the mistake of mentioning that Michael has one living relative, a niece, living in his hometown. That wakes him from his coma, and he escapes. Once Dr. Loomis hears about the escape, he knows exactly where Michael is going. He follows, but is slowed down by some car trouble, because Michael causes his car to explode when they cross paths at a gas station. Other versions of the script had Michael keeping his classic mask, but getting a wardrobe change. The Halloween 4 that was made puts him back in coveralls, which he steals from a mechanic at the gas station. When Loomis reaches Haddonfield, thanks to a ride from a drunken reverend, he enlists the help of the local sheriff. While Etchison's draft called for Sheriff Brackett to return from the first two films, the final draft tells us that Brackett retired and moved to Florida. The sheriff in Haddonfield now is Ben Meeker, but just like Brackett in the first movie, Meeker has a teenage daughter who is going to end up becoming one of Michael Myers' victims. Kelly Meeker also happens to be in a love triangle with Rachel Carruthers and Rachel's boyfriend Brady, who works at the pharmacy Michael steals his mask from. Loomis, Meeker, and Rachel do their best to keep Jamie safe from her uncle, which is quite difficult to do, given that Michael is even able to massacre the entire Haddonfield police force. With no more cops around other than Meeker, Loomis stirs up a vigilante mob in hope they'll be able to stop Michael. Jamie is taken to the Meeker home, where the doors are locked and the windows are nailed shut. They don't realize Michael is already in the house with them. More murder and chase sequences ensue. It's impressive that McElroy was able to write the script so quickly, but he did have the foundation of an existing script to work from, and it was also a benefit that Halloween 4 is basically a reworking of the first movie. They just had a $5 million budget to work with this time, instead of a $300,000 budget. So while there are moments in Part 4 that are similar to Part 1, they play out in a bigger, flashier way. For example, in the first movie, we see that Michael got his coveralls from a tow truck driver. Loomis finds his hospital gown at the tow truck, and the driver's corpse is laying on the ground nearby. In Part 4, we see Michael kill the mechanic he gets the coveralls from. Loomis shows up to find the mechanic's corpse and other dead bodies. He fires some shots at Michael. Then Michael speeds away in a tow truck and causes the gas station to explode on his way out. Another example. At the end of Part 1, Loomis fires 6 shots into Michael, knocking him off a balcony. In Part 4, Meeker and state police open fire on Michael with handguns and a shotgun, knocking him into a well. Pleasance liked the script for Halloween 4 and agreed to reprise the role of Loomis early on. He told Fangoria magazine that he decided to be in the movie, not only because he was available and the money was good, but because, quote, the story of Michael and Loomis continues to be a very good one. The series could have easily turned into a pointless exercise in money-making and greed, but the script is very good, and care has been taken with the development of the characters. Dwight H. Little built a strong cast around Pleasance, while future Sabrina the Teenage Witch star Melissa Joan Hart auditioned for the role of Jamie. It ended up going to Danielle Harris, who turned 11 during filming. The child actress delivered such a good and endearing performance. Harris still has a big following in the horror community and is considered to be a genre icon. Rebecca Schaefer, who would be tragically murdered by a stalker in 1989, was up for the role of Rachel Carruthers, but Little cast Ellie Cornell, who turned Rachel into a fan-favorite character. Sasha Jensen was cast as Rachel's boyfriend Brady. Kathleen Kinmont as Kelly, Rachel's rival for Brady's affections. Bo Starr plays Sheriff Meeker. The role of Michael Myers initially went to stuntman Tom Morga, who had previously played Jason Voorhees and Roy Burns in Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, and Leatherface for a moment during the first kills in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. But his time as Michael Myers didn't go smoothly. Scenes were shot with Morga can be seen in the finished film. When Michael kills the mechanic and causes trouble for Loomis at the gas station, that's Morga. That's him when Michael impales Kelly with a shotgun, and when he scares Jamie in the pharmacy. When Loomis tries to hide with Jamie in the schoolhouse and Michael attacks him, that's also Morga. Some have said that Morga was fired from Halloween 4 because Akkad didn't like his performance, but in the school scene, you get a hint of another reason. It's tied into why the mask looks so strange when Michael attacks Loomis. The original Michael Myers mask was a modified William Shatner mask from Dawn Post Studios, so when going into production on Halloween 4, makeup technician Ken Horn ordered a batch of 6 modified Shatner masks from the company. But when the masks showed up on set, they didn't look like Michael Myers. They were pink and had white hair, as you can see in the school scene. So Horn had to paint the masks white and dye the hair. On the set one day, a producer told him to do another modification before they shot the scene. He wanted the eye holes to be made bigger. Horn explained that it couldn't be done in the middle of filming because the mask would need a paint touch-up after the modification. If Morga put the mask on while the paint was fresh, it would knock him out. Morga backed him on this, and the studio blew it up into an argument that ended with Horn and Morga being fired. Luckily for him, a Fangoria journalist he was friends with was on set at the time and demanded that Horn be rehired. Morga wasn't so lucky, so a call went out for someone big to play Michael Myers, and that call was answered by George P. Wilbur. He hadn't seen the first 2 Halloweens yet, but he caught up on them and gave himself a crash course on how to move as Michael. Once he got on set, some extra bulk was added to his frame with hockey pads that he wore under the coveralls. In the movie, we get a mixture of Wilbur and Morga, but it's Wilbur playing Michael during some of the most famous scenes, like the sequence where he chases Jamie and Rachel through the Meeker house and up onto the roof. This wasn't as dangerous as it looks, because Wilbur and the actors weren't really on top of a house. The roof was built in an open field, the gutters close to the ground, and the highest point was still under 20 feet. But Cornell got injured filming the roof chase anyway, when a nail cut into her torso. This sequence was written as being even more intense in the script, as the Meeker house was supposed to be on fire by the time the characters were up on the roof. But the fire aspect of the roof chase was removed on the way to filming. The school chase was also more involved in McElroy's script. There was supposed to be a moment where Jamie hides under a desk in a classroom. Michael can't find her, so he starts flipping all the desks over. While that didn't make it into Halloween 4, the idea was used 10 years later for a scene in Halloween H2O. Makeup technician Ken Horn ran into another complication on set when Pleasance watched some footage. Since Loomis was caught in the same hospital fire that put Michael into a coma, The character now has a burn scar on his face, and the actor was appalled to see that the first design of the scar made it look like he had a fried egg on his face. So the scar was redesigned and changes throughout the movie, depending on when the scene was shot. Mustafa Akkad was not a fan of gore in movies, and he wanted Halloween 4 to have less bloodshed than Part 2 had. Even though this sequel has a higher body count, he thought the kills should be presented in the same way as in the first movie. When Fangoria was on set, Part 4 was hyped up based on 2 selling points. It had a twist ending, and there would be no gore. Well, the twist ending remains intact. The film does end with Jamie seeming to be under the influence of Michael in some way, picking up a pair of scissors and stabbing her foster mother, to the horror of everyone, especially Loomis. But there did end up being more gore than was originally intended. Audience response from a test screening indicated that viewers felt the movie wasn't edgy enough. They wanted to see more carnage. So the filmmakers did what they could to deliver that. Additional dates of filming were scheduled, so extra blood could be supplied by FX artist John Carl Buechler, who directed Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, and worked on A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, this same year. So when you see Michael stick his thumb into someone's forehead, or tear open the neck of a man who's giving Jamie and Rachel a ride, you can thank Buechler and the test screening audience for that. Halloween 4 had plenty of hurdles to clear on its way to the screen, but the end product was worth all the trouble. This movie was exactly what it needed to be. A simple stalk and slash story that brought Michael Myers back just the way he was before. Laurie Strode wasn't present, but Little and McElroy introduced us to some interesting new characters, people we could root for and care about. And they gave Pleasance a chance to dazzle us with another awesome Dr. Loomis performance. While the follow-ups to this film would get bogged down with unnecessary mysteries and supernatural elements, Little wanted his movie to be the straightforward story of a flesh and blood maniac wreaking havoc on Halloween night. He explained the logic of the film's version of Michael Myers to Starburst magazine. Quote, "The reason he got out of the ambulance is because we needed to get him free. The reason he goes to the diner and kills the mechanic is so he can get his outfit, his coveralls. The reason he blows up the gas station is so that we can take down the telephone lines. The reason he goes to the drugstore is so that he can get his mask. The reason he throws Bucky into the power lines is so that we can knock the power down in the town. We wanted to make everything about his slow approach to Haddonfield. We wanted everything to be believable. We didn't want it to be tongue-in-cheek." Halloween 4's effectiveness is enhanced by the fact that Little really was able to capture the look and feel of a Midwestern Halloween on film. Even though the movie was shot during the spring, it's convincing as Halloween. The decorations, the fallen leaves, which were spread around the set by greenskeeper Mike Lukenland, who is better known for playing Bobby Brady on The Brady Bunch. Pumpkins, some of which were painted squashes since pumpkins weren't available at the time. The movie was shot in Utah, which helped with the small Midwestern town feel. The previous movies had been shot just outside Los Angeles. One of the most popular things about Halloween 4 is the opening title sequence, which immediately envelopes the viewer in Halloween atmosphere. Even fans of the franchise who aren't so fond of Halloween 4 will admit that the opening montage is a thing of beauty. In his audio commentary, Little revealed that the idea behind showing these images, Halloween decorations in rural areas, shots of farmland, was meant to be a nod to the origins of the holiday. Quote, "We were trying to get the idea of what Halloween was and how that holiday began. We started going through all these books and research materials and realized it was part of an agrarian tradition, starting in New England at the end of the harvest season. When the crops were all harvested and winter was coming, it was kind of a macabre festival. So we found these agricultural images and we wanted to go back to the roots of the Halloween tradition. But even if you don't know the reasoning behind these shots, they're still great to look at." Not long after the sequence was done, the theme music kicks in and we're fully immersed in the return of Michael Myers. John Carpenter had composed the scores for the previous films, but he had washed his hands of the Halloween movies by now. So the filmmakers got the next best composer they could find, Alan Howarth, who worked alongside Carpenter on several of his movies. For the 3 films that made up the Jamie Lloyd trilogy, Howarth kept the Halloween sound alive in Carpenter's absence. Michael Myers himself had been absent for most of the 80s, and moviegoers gave him a warm welcome when he came back in 1988. Halloween 4 made almost $18 million at the box office, over 3 times the budget Akkad had put into it. It was so successful, Halloween 5 was immediately given a green light. Part 4 was released on October 21st, 1988, and Halloween 5 was in theaters less than a year later, on October 13th, 1989. That one wasn't as well received as 4 was, but that's a story in a different episode. For now, let's just celebrate the success that Little, McElroy, and the cast and crew had with this sequel. They were tasked with bringing an icon back to the screen, and did so with a well-crafted movie that many fans love and continue to enjoy to this day, more than 30 years later. Michael Myers made his return, and it was so triumphant, it has allowed him to come back many more times. At the end of Halloween 4, Michael Myers is shot by a lynch mob and police officers until he falls backward in a gaping hole in the ground. The ground starts to collapse in on itself, burying Michael for good, bringing to an end his decade-long killing streak. Back at home, Jamie grabs a pair of scissors and stabs her adoptive mother. Has the evil transferred to her? Is Michael Myers really dead? Of course not. Michael Myers never dies. Less than a year later, Halloween 5 hit theater screens. After seeing it, a lot of fans felt that the film was rushed into production and didn't make much sense. They would be right. Part 5 would end up being the lowest grossing film in the entire franchise, even still, up to when this video is released. What happened to this film that caused it to be the black sheep of the franchise? Let's find out what the happened to this horror movie. Producer Mustafa Akkad had always been very vocal about how much he loved the Halloween franchise, and more importantly, how much money it made for him. One rule he had was that no matter what happened to Michael Myers, there had to be a way to bring him back for the sequel. As long as Michael's body was intact, he could always return for another movie. When Halloween 4 was a big hit at the box office, it was a sure thing that he would stalk his way back onto the big screen. Akkad turned to his Halloween 4 creative team, director Dwight Little and screenwriter Alan McElroy, but they decided not to come back for another installment. Mustafa tried multiple times to get Little to come back, but he had moved on from the series. In an interview for the book Taking Shape, he said, quote, "My feeling was that the ending to our film was almost perfect in such a way that I didn't really know what to do after that." The producer would then turn to screenwriter Shem Bitterman. He turned in an unusual draft for Halloween 4, but Akkad had liked his writing, so he gave him another shot. Shem turned in a draft called Halloween 5, The Killer Inside Me. In his version, Jamie has taken on the evil from her uncle. She is now a teenager and begins to go on a killing spree. Little does she know that her uncle isn't dead and has returned to once again take out his entire family. Stuck in the middle is Jamie's adoptive sister Rachel, who had to figure out how to stop both of them. Mustafa wasn't a big fan of the script, as he felt it was really more of a parody of the Halloween franchise than an actual entry into the series. He kept the script for the moment and began to look for a director. Deborah Hill actually recommended Swiss indie director Dominique Othenin-Girard. They had met at an event and had really hit it off. Akkad reached out and offered to meet with him. Othenin-Girard went and rented Halloween 4 to see what he would be working with. When Dominique showed up for his meeting, he also brought with him screenwriter Roger Harders. As he sat down with Akkad and Bitterman, he began to explain the problems he felt the script had. He asked Akkad, "Do you want to make a Halloween 6? To which Mustafa said yes. Dominique then grabbed the script, walked over, and threw it directly in the garbage can. He said that was the only way he would be able to make another Halloween film after Part 5. Akkad was livid and felt it was highly disrespectful to do such a thing. After a couple of seconds, he then asked him what he would do instead. Roger Harders then talked about turning the movie into something similar to the Frankenstein mythos. The film would open with Myers' lifeless body trapped among the debris that fell in on him at the end of the last movie. Cables and metal rebar would hold him as a big storm raged outside. Lightning would strike, and the bolt would bring him back to life because of all the metal and cables that were holding him up. From there, it would show that he had been purged of his pure evil, but when confronted by people, they would keep trying to kill him. The goal was to make him sympathetic, and any violence he issued throughout the movie was just for his own survival. The only person that could see he had been cleared of the evil was Dr. Loomis, who tried to stop people from hurting him. It was a far cry from the Michael Myers audiences had seen before. Akkad hated the idea and shot it down. He did offer Dominique the chance to direct it, and for Harders to write the film, but they had to come up with a different idea. Once he saw how much they were offering him to write, Harders turned it down. He didn't want to work for so little money if they weren't going to use the idea he really wanted to do. From there, Michael Jacobs was brought in. He and Dominique had worked together before, and they clicked right away on the script. In Halloween 5, we learn that Michael was able to escape his mineshaft tomb just before they threw the bomb down to finish him off. He floats downriver, where he is found by a homeless man living in a shack. The man takes him where Michael lays motionless for an entire year. On Halloween, he wakes up, puts his mask on, and chokes the kind Samaritan that kept him alive for an entire year. Jamie, on the other hand, has been sent to an institution for children. She has been mute ever since the night she stabbed her adoptive mother with a pair of scissors. Her family has left town for the weekend to avoid the painful reminder of the year before. Rachel, though, feels bad leaving her there, so she stays home. Dr. Loomis keeps coming to see Jamie, only to aggressively suggest that she is still connected to Michael and wants to know where he is. Michael once again shows up to find his niece, but this time she seems to be psychically linked to him anytime he is about to kill someone. Rachel ends up getting dispatched by Myers, so her friend Tina has to be the one to watch after Jamie and avoid getting killed on Halloween night. During this all is a mysterious man dressed all in black who shows up in town. We notice that he has a tattoo on his wrist that Michael has, but has never been shown up to this point. Michael eventually falls into a trap set by Loomis and the police. Loomis attacks Michael with a wooden plank, but falls on top of the killer, seeming to die of a heart attack. Michael is taken into custody and put in a jail cell. Moments later, the man in black arrives at the police station, kills everyone in the office, springs Myers, and takes Jamie. Roll credits. Before cameras even started rolling, there were problems. Donald Pleasance was not a fan of the direction the movie was going to go. He believed they should have been going forward with the notion that Jamie had taken on Michael's evil and Loomis had to stop her from following in the family tradition. This brought him into conflict with the director and Akkad himself. Mustafa wanted Jamie to be an innocent child, just like she had been in Part 4. Pleasance still agreed to be in the film, but wasn't happy with the idea. When he got on set, he found that he was constantly clashing with the director over how Loomis should be portrayed. Dominique wanted him to be overtly aggressive and almost a villain himself. Pleasance felt that Loomis would do what he could to stop Michael, but would never put a child in harm's way. He butted heads often over how the scenes were shot. After a while, he finally relented, as his character was planned to be killed off in the final act. He figured, since he was leaving the franchise anyway, it wouldn't make much of a difference. Even when press were visiting the set, he would often talk about how he didn't like the story or direction the film was heading. He even let slip that Loomis was going to die in this film, and that it was his last of the franchise. Another cast member who wasn't a fan of the script was Ellie Cornell. When she found out she was being brought back, she was excited. After she read the script, she was less than happy. 20 pages in, her character Rachel is killed off in a pretty gruesome scene. Michael stabbed her in the throat with a pair of scissors. Cornell thought it was too gruesome of an end for her character. She fought to have it changed, and instead, they had her get stabbed in the heart. Later, Mustafa Akkad expressed regret for okaying her character to be killed off. Dominique wanted to surprise the audience similar to the way Psycho had done back in 1960. They wanted fans to believe that Rachel would be the main character, only to kill her off, showing that no one was safe in this movie. A much more interesting role was originally in the works for the Rachel character. The plan was to have her been traumatized by the events of the previous year. She had been hanging out with a different crowd and was much more of a freewheeling Rachel than we had seen before. We would have seen her still dealing with Michael's attack by spiraling into drugs and alcohol. She would have been a much more free spirit than the good girl we had seen in Part 4. As the script continued, it was decided to move her back to the same type of character we saw in the last film and add in a new character, Tina. She embodied everything Rachel was supposed to be originally. Fans did not take to Tina very well at all. About a third of the way through shooting the film, Mustafa Akkad came up with an idea he wanted to put into the movie to leave the audience on a cliffhanger. He pulled Dominique aside and said he wanted to add a mysterious character into the film. This would push the mystery into the next movie and make fans excited for the sequel. Dominique agreed, but had no idea what the character would mean. He opted to create the Man in Black and have him connected to Michael somehow. The rune tattoos were added to give them a direct link. When asked about the idea for the character, he states that he had no idea who the man was or how he was even connected to Myers. He said that would be for the next filmmaker to figure out. This handcuffed director Joe Chappelle for the next installment. He now had to figure out a story to explain the Men in Black and what their connection was. A lot of scenes were shot for the movie that ended up getting thrown on the cutting room floor. The original opening of the film had a completely different character meeting Michael after he narrowly escaped being blown up. The character was referred to as Dr. Death. Instead of a homeless man, he was a young man that was obsessed with the occult. He was in a shack with all sorts of skulls and symbols. We meet him as he's using tarot cards. Michael lands on his doorstep, and then we cut to a year later. The scene seems to indicate that Michael actually died from his wounds the year before. Dr. Death is once again performing a ritual on the body of Myers as his hand starts to twitch. Michael is revived, and Dr. Death exclaims, "He's alive!" He celebrates that his ritual was successful. We see there are symbols all over the shack and are led to believe that the thorn tattoo on Michael's wrist was put there as part of the ceremony. That makes a lot more sense than it was just always there and no one ever noticed. Michael puts his mask back on and kills the evil doctor and goes on his merry way. This also is the event that lets Jamie know psychically that Michael has returned. It looks like they were going in a more supernatural direction than any of the Halloween films had done before. This could have been one of the reasons it was ultimately scrapped in favor of the opening we got. The ending was also tweaked. Originally, Sheriff Meeker is in his office when the Man in Black enters and begins his massacre. Meeker would run out into the office only to find Michael's empty cell. He would then die at the hands of the Man in Black. A gory photo of his death appeared in an issue of Fangoria magazine as they covered the film before release. It was later changed to Jamie discovering Michael's empty cell. Some minor changes throughout included that Jamie's friend Billy was supposed to be into BMX bikes. He was supposed to use his bike throughout the film. Then the car chase was supposed to have Billy and Jamie on his BMX trying to outrun Michael in his car. It was found that actor Jeffrey Landman was not very good at riding a bike. Seeing how much of a problem this was going to be, they purged any mention or use of the bike. Instead, the actors just ran from the car, which in reality does make it a more tense scene. One thing that a lot of fans dislike about this film is the presentation of the Myers house. In the original, it was a plain square house that didn't seem all that special. In this film, it's presented as a big Victorian house. Dominique felt that the original house wasn't very cinematic. He wanted something that had more room inside for the scenes where Michael and Loomis were facing off. Well, he didn't think the location change was a big deal. Continuity snobs like myself did not enjoy this. But of course, we're talking about a franchise that has rebooted itself 4 times now, so I guess I can't complain too much. The film's biggest hurdle came when it went off to every film's dreaded stage of production. Say it with me, folks, the MPAA. During this time, they were being extremely harsh with horror films, and they didn't let this one slip by. They gave the film an X rating. In order to be able to do a wide release, they're going to have to trim down a lot of the violence and gore from the film. Some of the scenes that were either trimmed or removed included a shot of Tina's boyfriend Mikey spasming on the ground after getting a hand rake stuck in his head. The shot was gruesome and made his death more explicit. When Michael punches through the windshield of a cop car, originally a piece of glass was shown embedded in the officer's face. That had to go. During the car chase in the field, Billy was originally supposed to get hit on his leg to injure him. That was scrapped, and instead, Billy just sort of falls away from the car. Maybe the most bloody scene next was when Samantha is killed with the scythe in the barn. It was originally supposed to go through her forehead. The jerks at the MPAA got their way, and the film got truncated down enough for an R rating. It hit theaters on October 13, 1989. Fans and critics alike didn't express much love for the film, but it did end up making a profit. This ensured that another entry in the franchise would be made, but fans were starting to wonder if they could trust the films anymore. When Part 6 did come out, it showed that they couldn't. The whole franchise had to be rebooted to gain fans' interest again. After the highs of Halloween 4, it was only inevitable that the series would come crashing down again. No one thought it would be this soon. Halloween 5 is still the lowest grossing film in the entire franchise, and it seemed to waste any storylines that Part 4 had set up. Many consider it the lowest point in the franchise. Sure, it's bad, but is it Busta Rhymes bad? Oof, that's another video for another time. Until then, trick or treat, motherfucker.
The 90s were an odd time for the heavy-hitting 80s icons. Every big one tried to do the old, look behind the curtain to some effect. And Michael Myers was no different.
It's his mark.
But after the opium-induced bore fest that was Part 5, the 90s MTV era seeped in to Part 6. And though what we got was a mess, and in terms of behind-the-scenes backstory, quite fascinating, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that, flaws aside, Curse of Michael Myers gave us the only true great schlocky entry that went for style over substance and did the one thing that has been missing for far too long. It gave Michael his edge back. So like I often say, take a hit if that's your thing, and don't forget to make it a home pour if you're more of a drinker. And let's try to have some fun as I dig into this battered yet entertaining sequel, Halloween 6: The Curse of Michael Myers. The Halloween franchise has always had a harder go, being that the first is a stone cold classic, and that the silent killer never had the chance to grow or expand. I mean, think about it, unlike Freddy or Chucky, whose personalities could evolve in entertaining and interesting visual ways, or like Jason Voorhees, where you end up rooting for him, Michael Myers has been stuck in a similar loop with very few variations, and I get it. I respect that it has always been razor straight. But if there was ever a franchise that should have stayed a single entry, let's be honest, Halloween is it. But hey, that's not life. Things go on, things continue, and so to enjoy the sequels, you need to accept a varying degree of stupid shit. And when it came time to explain Michael, Halloween 6 took this fool's errand on, giving us a sequel that is dunked on constantly. Yet, looking back so many years later, it's a hell of a lot more fun than a few of the Xanax-induced sequels that the series has sprinkled in. Now, there are two cuts for those not overly familiar with the 6th entry. The producer's cut, which for many years was hard to own. I mean, hell, I even have a grainy copy I got from Flashback Weekend in 2004, but was finally released in all of its HD glory by Shout Factory in 2014. And then there is the theatrical cut with the reshoots, re-edits, and different soundtrack. I am going to be defending the theatrical cut. I know. Hey, but I'm a pragmatic guy. I'll gladly admit that in terms of storytelling and all-around filmmaking competency, the producer's cut is better. But the issue being that the cult stuff is so f***ing ridiculous to begin with, that going full measure on that undermines a cool and brutish version of Michael. I'm sorry. There are ways to do the cult and present it to where I'm not laughing at it, like a 70s Cheech Marin. They go full 70s TV movie of the week with these big goofy robes and magical stones that can stop Michael. I mean, dude, it doesn't work. Again, it is much maligned, but I've always found the idea of a cult more interested in scientific experiments cooler than of ancient blood sacrifices. My opinion. Though a complete mess and way more convoluted, trimming down the cult stuff and making it more modern gave us a still batshit crazy idea. But for this guy, it just goes down a bit smoother. Part 5 set up a few things without any interest in how it would eventually pay off because, well, it ain't Part 5, and so they didn't care. Part 5 gave us Michael's wrist tattoo, which I will say, to be fair, made a lot more sense with the now infamous Dr. Death deleted scene. It gave us a man in black walking around in an attire so loud and distracting that there's no way he's walking around a small Illinois town without being noticed. Not to mention, he kicks a f***ing dog like 5 seconds after arriving, so he's not really a man best suited for recon. Yet Revenge of Michael Myers bombed, and it took 6 whole years to get this sequel off the ground. And if one thing I love about the 80s horror franchises was the unnecessary need to continue exactly where the one before left off. And so Halloween 6 had to do double duty. It had to continue a story set up by one of the worst and incredibly boring sequels, yet bring the Halloween franchise into the 90s with a fresh and modern take. And though I love Part 4 The Return and rank it as my favorite sequel, the mask and shoulder padding has always made Michael look like a sad grandpa. But with Curse, we finally get a good mask. I mean, I'll be honest, this is my favorite since the original, though I do understand Part 2 means a lot to some of you. I like its wider face, deeper eyes, and that crazy 90s hair. Yes. Like every 90s pop commercial, whether it be Mountain Dew or Pepsi, whatever. This mask and getup is extreme. In Curse, Michael busts onto the scene with zero fucks given, presenting to us the most aggressive performance of Michael Myers until Tyler Mane took the role in 2007. We get a 90s version of the wall kill with the nurse, to breaking the neck of the redneck. We get that great outside Deborah kill, and the slaughtering of the entire cult. And it's George P. Wilbur, the same guy from Part 4. So it just goes to show you what a better costume can do. And though I should say that Michael Lerner did play Michael Myers in the re-edited shoots at the end. But you get the point. And with a bulky, pissed off Michael, Curse gets something else right. It has a likable and entertaining cast. Yeah, crazy, right? Mitch Ryan as Dr. Terrence Wynn has an elegance and natural charm that works.
To old friends, to retirement, to new beginnings.
Yeah, it's a stock villain role, yet Ryan pulls it off with ease. Of course, Donald Pleasance comes back, though his age is clearly showing, with him passing not too long after they wrapped filming. Even with a paycheck job, and that's what this is, his class and presence shine through. Marianne Hagen deserves a ton more credit as Kara Strode. She's calm, cool, and collective. The 80s teen tropes were far gone, and characters like Tina were left in the 80s where they belong. Kara is such an easy and likable character to follow. Marianne Hagen plays her with a maturity that was easy to get on board with. And of course, Paul Rudd is Tommy Doyle. This is such a strange and weird performance, and Rudd clearly isn't on the joke here, but damn if he isn't a fascinating watch. His line delivery is that of legend.
Can you tell me if a bus arrived from Pontiac last night?
That's my baby. There's been an accident.
What kind of accident?
Get me a doctor, now!
Say what you will about Curse, but Rudd has always known the assignment and delivered. And like any good slasher, you need some good old-fashioned low-life characters. Some well-executed sleaze. We get Leo Getter playing the fantastic shock jock Barry Sims. A small part, yes, but the guy owns it and makes Barry instantly unlikable. And so, I kinda like him. I like a good sleaze in a movie if done right. And Barry is that sleaze. Also, as a side note, people usually refer to Barry as a sort of Howard Stern, which always bothered me. Haddonfield is a fake town set in Illinois. Know your history. It's a fake town in Illinois. Barry is like Man-Cow Moeller. And then there's the over-the-top bastard of a dad, John, flawlessly played by Bradford English. And this is the kind of guy you write in a movie where it's just like, hey, we need him to be hated and killed violently, and they hit the bullseye on this one. I'm not gonna lie, this guy got more than a few chuckles out of me because he was just such an incredibly big asshole for really no reason.
Deborah, you've lost it now. You know that, Deborah? You've just lost it. I got a great idea. Here, why don't you give her all of our goddamn money?
And of course, if you have a well-executed villain, that being Michael Myers, as some likable teens, the final area you need to nail is the atmosphere. Part 6 has some of the best atmosphere in the series. Yes, I know how angry that must make you feel, but Part 6 feels like Halloween. And you'd only know that if you grew up somewhere with seasons. I gotta be honest, if you're coastal, you're not gonna get this. Though Part 4 was the first that truly nailed the feel, I always had a small issue that they put Haddonfield, a little too far in the backwoods. Whereas Carpenter set his fake Illinois town in more of a quiet suburb. And this nails that better than any other. This movie actually establishes Haddonfield about an hour southwest of Joliet, not very far from Pontiac. Like Part 5, this was filmed in Salt Lake City, but Curse made a smart move and filmed during the fall. And it shows. Barren trees, ground covered in dead leaves. How can you not love this scene where Michael walks towards a house in that October storm? Or Barry's bloody corpse raining down blood on a child in that cold October night? The look of the Myers house. And the street. This is the look we never got until part 6, and it's a hill I am willing to die on. As a late-stage Halloween slasher, Halloween 6: The Curse of Michael Myers is fun. Flawed? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this jumps in the so bad it's good pool more than a few times. But it's still a rock and roll MTV entry, and the 90s kid in me will always have a little bit of love for it. It delivers on its basic needs. Joe Chappelle has an eye and gives this more style and energy than it probably deserves. Michael is a force of nature, looking better than he has in years. And though it makes little sense story-wise, I must admit I kinda like the scientific aspect of the cult. And Michael killing the folks he's controlled by is like when a captive lion is done taking shit and bites back. It's a cool ending set piece, and again, yeah, it makes no sense. But with a snappy pace and a violent Myers, it's a cool visual and it gets the job done. The editing is very music video heavy in this cut, yet the electric guitar fits with the altered aesthetic. And kinda makes this work in its own way. In the end, Halloween 6: Curse of Michael Myers makes for an interesting movie that didn't have a great plan to begin with, yet isn't nearly as bad as most would claim. It's a great looking, mean entry that gets weird. Say what you will about Curse, but it is never boring. And in life, if you aim to entertain, you make the kills aggressive and keep up the pace, even 6 entries in, you can still have some fun. And for that, I'll always have your back.
As we all know, the first half of the 90s could often be a pretty scary time for the horror genre. Of course, there were more than a few standouts, but for the most part, the slasher overload of the 80s had made the general audience rather weary of the genre. It was left to the hardcore fanatics to seek out the real gems. Even horror superstars weren't pulling in the public anymore, some of them seriously slumming it in movies that were practically made to be sent direct to video. The unkillable Michael Myers was not immune to this phenomena. In 1995, after hibernating for 6 years, the Shape made a not-so-triumphant return to the big screen with the 6th Halloween film, The Curse of Michael Myers, a movie with plenty of behind-the-scenes drama of its own. It did not impress at the box office, grossing $15 million domestically, and was largely ignored by the same fans who had been a support system for Michael Myers and the ever-dwindling population of Haddonfield. Halloween 6's poor showing meant that while Michael would indeed return again one day, he might be headed direct to video, perhaps the only real way to kill the boogeyman. But instead of being tossed into the bargain bins, the next Halloween would ultimately shake up the franchise in a big way, at least temporarily, thanks to the return of one very important figure from the franchise's past. No matter what your calendar currently says, it's Halloween right now, so grab some treats as we figure out what the f happened to Halloween H2O 20 years later. Oof, what a title.
Be more responsible, Mom!
I just need this one thing!
Mom, I am not responsible for you! He's dead. Michael Myers is dead.
The disappointing performance of The Curse of Michael Myers seemed to indicate that Michael Myers was no longer a viable moneymaker on the big screen. For a while, it looked like a direct sequel to Halloween 6 was going to be the way to go, but that notion fell through early on once things got interesting for the project. Enter a young TV writer named Robert Zappia, whose filmography at the time included gigs on TV shows like Home Improvement and LA Firefighters. And you're excused if you don't remember LA Firefighters. No one does. Zappia had written a sci-fi spec script called Population Zero, that caught the attention of Richard Potter, an executive at Dimension. Potter told Zappia that the company had an open assignment sitting around, Halloween 7. Zappia, being a major fan of the franchise, jumped at the chance to write a new entry. Zappia was ultimately told to ignore the many loose ends and strange plot twists of Halloween 6 and start fresh, a reboot of sorts. Zappia's concept saw Michael Myers stalking an all-girls boarding school, while a copycat killer helps police track him down. Sort of Halloween meets Silence of the Lambs, if you will. It was to be called Halloween, the Two Faces of Evil, and it quickly had the support of producers Bob and Harvey Weinstein, along with the longtime franchise producer Mustafa Akkad and his son Malik. But things would change rather quickly for the 7th Halloween. Bob Weinstein allegedly came up with the idea of bringing back Jamie Lee Curtis to the role of the ultimate final girl, Laurie Strode. Although Curtis would later say that she was the one who approached the studio of the notion of coming back to the fold. Regardless, with the 20th anniversary of the original Halloween right around the corner, having Curtis reprise her role was irresistible to all involved. Curtis would eventually say that she did the part out of loyalty to the horror community, who had been so supportive of her in her early career. Fittingly, it would be her first horror movie since 1981's Halloween 2. Robert Zappia got a call from Bob Weinstein telling him that his initial draft of Halloween: Two Faces of Evil was very well received, but that it was not going to be made. With Curtis now on board, Zappia was told to scrap the majority of his script, save for the boarding school idea, and find a way to bring Laurie into the mix. The budget would be upped significantly, and the new idea was to release the film theatrically, with the hope being that the combination of Curtis's return and the 20th anniversary angle would be a big deal for moviegoers. Once she was fully on board, Jamie Lee didn't like the idea of doing the film without the two people who made the original, John Carpenter and his co-writer and producer Deborah Hill. The trio approached Bob Weinstein with the idea of all of them coming back to work on the new Halloween, but Carpenter had a major stipulation. He wanted to be paid somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 million to direct the film. The thinking being he'd finally be getting the hefty payday that he never received for his work on the other Halloween movies. Obviously, the studio balked, and Carpenter and Hill walked away. Regardless of the duo's departure, Jamie Lee had taken a very active role at this point in the production, and though she never received a producer credit, it's clear that she was one of the main people behind the scenes getting the film on its feet. She made sure the script would deal with the trauma that Laurie had lived with after her encounter with Michael, and wanted to show that the past 20 years had done a major number on the character, turning her into a paranoid alcoholic who'd run away from Haddonfield. Her ideas were met with some resistance from the series producers, who were afraid Curtis was bringing the film into too dark and psychological of a territory for a Halloween film. But this aspect of the character was very important to Curtis, and so she persisted and got her way. Another crucial move by the actress was the hiring of Steve Miner to direct. Miner had directed Curtis in the fantasy film Forever Young a few years prior, and he was her first choice to direct Halloween 7 after Carpenter's early departure. The fact that Miner had directed a couple of the Friday the 13th sequels, as well as House and Warlock, proved he knew a thing or two about the genre as well. But let's return to the script again for a minute. At this point, the all-girls school setting was changed to being a co-ed private school, so that Laurie's son John, a main character, could attend. Although the production briefly flirted with the idea of the son being the only boy in the otherwise female-dominated school. What a school year that would be for the young man. I'm thinking Laurie would be a grandmother very soon. Anyway, the idea of the copycat killer was still in play, and eventually revealed to be the character of Charlie Devereaux, John's best buddy and roommate. A heavily rewritten version of the character would eventually be played in H2O by Adam Han Bird, who actually thought he was signing up to play the killer when he was initially cast. About 2 weeks before production, Adam was informed that the script had been altered significantly, and now he was playing the stereotypical horny best friend. At the end of the original version of the script, Charlie, the copycat killer, meets the real Michael Myers, who takes out the young psycho. Intriguingly, a different take on this idea would be explored to much controversy in David Gordon Green's Halloween Ends, with good old Corey Cunningham playing the role of the troubled copycat killer. But the script would get a major makeover by one Kevin Williamson, who at the time had become the biggest name in horror thanks to his scripts for Scream and Scream 2. Naturally, it was Dimension chief Bob Weinstein who encouraged Williamson to board H2O thanks to their shared love of the original Halloween, not to mention the major success of the Scream movies. Williamson was initially hesitant to join, but he was burnt out thanks to his sudden popularity. But when he met with Jamie Lee Curtis, he jumped aboard. Williamson worked extensively with Curtis and Steve Miner on the project, and even stuck around the set to play script doctor during production. Ultimately, he didn't get a credit on the finished screenplay, because according to the WGA, he didn't contribute enough. But he eventually received an executive producer credit as a thank you from the Weinsteins. Filming would take place in California on a somewhat tight schedule, with the production commencing in February of 1998, with an eye toward releasing the film that summer. Playing Laurie's stressed out son John would be Josh Hartnett, a complete unknown at the time. Hartnett got the role because he had auditioned for another Dimension project, The Faculty, and the casting directors recommended him for H2O. Not unlike his character, Hartnett didn't easily conform to what was expected of him on set. His legendarily terrible hair in the film was his own doing. He hated the idea that the character would be presented as just another heartthrob, so he intentionally messed up his hair, even awkwardly cutting it himself. When cameras weren't rolling, he'd wear a beanie just to make it look worse. So if you've ever been fascinated and appalled by John's messy do, you have Hartnett to thank. Returning to the franchise alongside Curtis was Nancy Stevens, who'd played Nurse Marion Chambers in Halloween and Halloween 2. The opening scene featuring the character was one of the last remaining things that was taken directly from Robert Zappia's first draft, although at one point the character was changed to be Dr. Sam Loomis's daughter. At the end of the day, the filmmakers thought bringing back Nurse Chambers would connect the film even more directly to its predecessors. Naturally, you probably know that playing Laurie's dedicated secretary was none other than Janet Leigh, Jamie Lee's mother, in an homage both to their relationship and Leigh's own history with the horror genre. Her brief role is littered with references to the legendary Psycho, right down to the car her character drives, which is the same one that Marion buys in the Hitchcock classic. Though it wasn't the first time that they were in the same movie. It was, however, the first time that mother and daughter had shared a scene together. Another brief cameo comes from Dr. Loomis himself during the film's opening credits. We may only hear his voice, obviously, but because the production couldn't find the original audio of the deceased Donald Pleasance's speech about Michael, they had to go to a voice actor named Tom Kane. Kane recorded his voiceover in the presence of one of Donald's best friends, who was able to judge how close Kane's voice was to the iconic actors. After about 50 takes, Kane got it right, and that's the take that you hear in the finished film.
The blackest eyes, the devil's eyes.
Of course, the film's most famous cast member, aside from Jamie Lee Curtis of course, is LL Cool J as aspiring novelist and security guard Ronnie. Cool J was cast because market research told Dimension that this genre of film was very popular with African American audiences, so they felt bringing in a star of LL Cool J's caliber would boost ticket sales. The movie's young cast was properly starstruck by LL's presence, and the rapper took his job as an actor quite seriously, to the point where he'd hang around on set even when his character wasn't in the scene. Of course, there's no Halloween without Michael Myers. Okay, Halloween 3 aside. And stuntman Chris Durand was cast to portray the pitiless killer. Durand had been one of several stuntmen to portray Ghostface in Dimension's Scream 2 the previous year, making him one of a very small group of people who can say that he's played two horror icons. Even more integral to the character than the man playing him is the mask itself, which has undergone plenty of changes throughout the years. In fact, it would go through plenty of changes on H2O alone. The production started with a mask made by the guys at K&B, but 3 weeks into shooting, the Weinsteins decided that they didn't like that mask and ordered a new one, along with reshoots. After K&B's mask was tossed in the trash, the production went to another legend in the makeup biz, John Carl Buechler, best known as the director of Troll and Friday the 13th Part 7. in addition to his many credits as a makeup artist. Buechler had created the mask for the previous film, Curse of Michael Myers, so he attempted as best he could to recreate the look of that one. Strangely, this mask switching was done without Steve Miner's knowledge, which is weird because you think the director should be informed of such things. Rumor has it that he was not happy with the sudden change. Alas, this new mask wasn't popular either. So then another legend in the game, Stan Winston, was brought on to create yet another mask. Reshoots were done in order to get close-ups of this preferred mask, but when you watch the film, you'll see at least 4 different masks worn by Michael, including an awkward CGI one. With so many masks on set, you'd think that they could have just slapped one of them on that guy. Another disagreement between producers and creatives would be the end of the film. Jamie Lee and Miner, as well as the Weinsteins, were determined to have this be the last film in the trilogy, if you will, following parts 1 and 2. The idea was to kill off Michael and give Laurie the piece that she needed to move on. However, Mustafa Akkad, owner of the franchise, understandably didn't love the idea of killing off his golden goose, at least not permanently. Apparently, it was Kevin Williamson who came up with the idea of having Michael pull the old switcheroo with the paramedic off screen. That way, when an eventual sequel was made, they had a reason, ridiculous as it was, to resurrect Michael. Jamie Lee wasn't pleased with this caveat. She did not want to cheat the audience, and when she signed up to do the film, it was the understanding that Laurie would kill Michael in the end. When she found out that things weren't going to work out that way, she told producers that if they wanted to have her in the next movie, they'd have to pay her a lot of money and kill her off in the first 10 minutes. And she got her wish. Years later, Curtis would express some regret about doing H2O, mostly because it was made without the participation of John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. She admitted thinking it's a good movie, but not a great one. But more than anything, she was happy to have gotten a nice paycheck out of it and put her stamp on it where she could. Of course, Curtis would revisit Laurie Strode a few more times, starting in 2018, with a new trilogy of Halloween films that ignored all of the other movies save for the 1978 original. Halloween H2O opened to the tune of $24 million on its opening weekend in August of 1998, coming out just a little over 3 months after it had wrapped production. It ended up making $55 million in the US off of a budget of $17 million, so it was certainly profitable, if not exactly a box office smash. While it didn't blow critics away, it was a serviceable treat for fans of the franchise who yearned to see Jamie Lee Curtis return to the series that started it all, for her and for the slasher genre. Regardless of what you think of the many sequels featuring Laurie Strode, there's no doubt that Jamie Lee is often the best thing about them. We love our Scream Queen, and it's bloody good to know that she loves us back.
You hit me like I murdered your f***ing mother or something. Relax, man. I'm only trying to give America a good show.
You knew we'd have to tackle this one eventually, so let's hold hands and get through this together. Halloween Resurrection. The two words combined are enough to send chills down the spines of even the most hardcore movie fans. It causes trick-or-treaters to cross to the other side of the street. It's the movie your parents warned you about. It's the movie where this happens.
Trick-or-treat, mother.
To watch it is to wonder how, as in, how did we get here? From the terrifyingly simple 1978 classic to the silly slapdash goof. Sure, it has its defenders, I think, but most of us agree that it lives near the bottom of the barrel of the Halloween franchise, and maybe of the horror genre itself. But we're completionists, and truth be told, the hows and whys of Resurrection's existence are much more interesting than the movie itself. So thanks in advance for logging into our chat room, so we can all figure out what the f happened to Halloween Resurrection.
Fear motivates. Fear gives you the feeling of being alive.
Fear makes me want to throw up.
1998's Halloween H2O was, by and large, a decent success for Dimension Films. Not to mention a fitting conclusion to the saga of Laurie Strode and her evil brother Michael Myers. With a pretty definitive conclusion that saw the beheading of the masked antagonist, it looked as though we got that rare thing in the horror world, a satisfying conclusion to a franchise. But if we're being honest, no one was naive enough to believe that it would be the very end of the shape. And thanks to the above-average box office haul for the modestly budgeted film, a return from the grave was quickly brewing for Mr. Myers. Longtime producer Mustafa Akkad was never truly going to kill off his cash cow, and had even made sure that they shot a scene during H2O's production that indicated that Michael hadn't actually died at the film's conclusion. For her part, Jamie Lee Curtis was dismayed to learn another film was in the works, and wanted no part of it, but eventually agreed to appear in it if she got quickly killed off in the first act. The producer's initial idea was to have Laurie Strode commit suicide at the beginning of the film, but Curtis vetoed the idea immediately. In fact, it was allegedly her idea that the movie would open with Laurie in an asylum. And though the early scripts called for no more than a 30-second cameo from Curtis, she ended up shooting for 4 days on the picture before getting her death wish for Laurie. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. After H2O, Mustafa Akkad and his producer Paul Freeman were looking for ways to keep the franchise going. Intriguingly, the guys at Dimension Films pitched the idea of a Halloween movie that didn't feature Michael Myers at all, a la Season of the Witch. Unsurprisingly, Akkad rejected that concept, as the notion of making Halloween an anthology series had long ago been seen as a mistake. H2O scribe Robert Zappia supposedly came up with a pitch that was rejected, while Halloween 6 writer Daniel Farrands had pitched an idea subtitled Lord of the Dead that would actually see Laurie revealed as the killer at the end. No dice on that one either. The producers toyed with the idea of bringing back Josh Hartnett's John Tate at one point, while also looking to bring back LL Cool J's surviving security guard character, but neither panned out. There was evidently some talk of bringing back Halloween 4 and 5 star Danielle Harris, but obviously that never came to fruition either. Enter director-screenwriter Larry Brand, who shared an agent with producer Paul Freeman. Brand had impressed Akkad with a spec script of his, prompting the Halloween Godfather to ask him for any potential ideas he might have in regards to resurrecting Michael Myers. Brand divulged a concept that he'd come up with years earlier, involving a killer stalking people in a house that has been rigged with cameras, kind of like Big Brother with a murderer. Akkad responded positively to the concept and subsequently pitched it to Dimension. Soon enough, Brand received the green light to write the film, which would now take place not in some random hideaway, but the legendary Myers house. This new Halloween would go on to have several titles, such as Halloween, The Homecoming, H2K, Evil Never Dies, and believe it or not, Halloween, MichaelMyers.com. Oh, you gotta love the early 2000s. In any event, because the producers wanted to make it clear that Myers was returning, ultimately the subtitle Resurrection was landed upon. It would open with the revelation that Myers had put his mask on a hapless paramedic at the last minute, an idea hatched by H2O's co-writer Kevin Williamson during the production of that film. After Michael successfully finds Laurie and dispatches her, he's off to Haddonfield yet again to return home, only to find that it's now the scene of a reality show where contestants roam the hallways of his one-time abode. Of course, he has no choice but to dispatch the obnoxious participants of said reality show, making this the first time in the franchise that the audience and Michael Myers are on the same page. To direct the film, the producers wanted TV director Whitney Rancic, who had turned it down, as well as Halloween 4 helmer Dwight Little, who also rejected the offer. Ultimately, the decision was made to bring aboard Rick Rosenthal, who directed Halloween 2 some 20 years earlier. Incidentally, Rosenthal's Halloween ties go deeper than that. He's also the husband of actress Nancy Stevens, who portrayed Nurse Marion Chambers in Halloween, Halloween 2, and Halloween H2O, in which her character was finally killed off. Rosenthal hadn't directed much horror since Part 2, I mean if you don't count The Birds 2 that is, but he'd done plenty of television work throughout the years, and could jump back into the series with ease. He would also insert himself into the proceedings with a cameo as a professor towards the beginning of the film. Production commenced in May of 2001 in Vancouver, where a convincing replica of the Myers house was built on a soundstage, with appropriate aging and distress over 20 years. Of course, when you watch the movie, it seems like the interior of it belongs to a house about 3 times bigger than the exterior would suggest, but that's a different story.
Aren't we supposed to be looking for answers?
All right, the devil made him do it. I'm done.
Who would be playing the victims of the shape? As mentioned, the studio wanted to bring back LL Cool J since the general audience responded so well to him, but the rapper turned actor was too busy, or maybe just ready to move on. Sensing that the same quote-unquote urban audience that helped make H2O a hit would respond to another hip-hop star in a leading role, the producers set out to find their next unconventional star. Gangsta's Paradise singer Coolio was brought in to audition for the film, but ultimately they settled on New York's own Busta Rhymes. At the time, one of hip-hop's most prolific entertainers. Thankfully, Busta also had some acting experience, having appeared in John Singleton's Higher Learning, as well as Shaft. Rhymes would end up improvising a great deal of his dialogue on set, bringing what you have to admit is an infectious energy to the character of Freddy. The final character, Sarah, was to be played by Australian actress Jacinda Barrett, who had a supporting role in Urban Legend's final cut. But before filming began, Barrett dropped out to join a TV show, so the role went to Bianca Kylik, who had already been cast as Sarah's perky best friend, Jen Danzig. After Kylik pivoted to the lead role, actress Katie Sackhoff, who'd been cast as sultry Donna, was moved over to the Jen Danzig part. An interesting tidbit about Miss Kylik: she apparently cannot scream, which is a fascinating phenomenon in its own right, but especially troublesome for the lead in a horror movie. Hence, all her screams had to be added in during post-production. Playing Michael Myers this time around was professional stuntman Brad Loree, taking over for Chris Durand, who portrayed the Shape in H2O. Loree was called by one of the people at Dimension, asking if he'd be willing to try out for Michael Myers' stunt double. Not being a big horror fan, Loree initially thought that they meant the comedian Mike Myers, which he thought was rather odd. When it became obvious that it was the masked maniac, Loree auditioned for Rick Rosenthal and the film's producers simply by walking in a straight line, mimicking the Shape's infamous gait. Before he knew it, Loree was told he wasn't going to just be a stunt guy, but Michael Myers himself, and he'd have to go to LA to get a head cast done for the mask. Production in Vancouver lasted approximately 5 weeks, with another week of reshoots eventually added on. As is often the case, it was apparently not easy working with the Weinstein brothers on the shoot, as they'd constantly demand rewrites and reshoots. A new ending was thought up seemingly every other day, and the production ended up shooting 4 different finales. Trying to make the best of it, Rosenthal thought that they should release all 4 versions of the film theatrically, with the audience unaware which ending they'd be getting. But that idea was obviously not very practical. One notable deleted scene involved the death of Tyra Banks' character, Nora, who is Freddy's right-hand woman. Nora's death by strangulation was filmed but later cut from the final product because it was thought that there should be a scene where a character you didn't realize was dead is discovered by the hero. Still, publicity shots released before the movie clearly show Michael Myers ready to pounce Nora from behind. Editing the film was a challenge in general. All of the cameras that the actors are seen wearing were actually recording, and the post-production team found themselves with some 20+ hours of video footage. Editing that to make it coalesce with the 35mm footage proved to be difficult. A 40-minute cut of exclusively webcam footage titled Halloween Resurrection Webcam Special can be viewed on the Blu-ray or on YouTube. And honestly, as its own mini found footage horror flick, it's not bad. It certainly beats Resurrection in terms of effectiveness. Halloween Resurrection was originally meant to be released in September of 2001, but delays pushed that date back to April 2002. Thanks to reshoots, it was pushed back further, this time to July 12th, marking the first and only time that a Halloween film would be released in July. The posters for the film prominently displayed a short-haired Jamie Lee Curtis, looking exactly like she did in H2O, but a far cry from her appearance in Resurrection. The movie got off to an adequate start, making $12 million on its opening weekend in just under 2,000 theaters, but the next weekend saw it drop over 55%. All in all, it made $30 million at the domestic box office, a less impressive number than H2O's $52 million. Its budget was reportedly around $15 million, so the film likely eked out a profit thanks to home video. But the damage to the good Myers name had been done with one swift kick from Busta Rhymes. Of course, there would be no sequel to Resurrection, it being the official end to that particular timeline in the Halloween franchise. 5 years later, Michael would get a drastically different look, thanks to Rob Zombie and his Halloween reboot. But that's a topic for a different show. In recent years, both Jamie Lee Curtis and John Carpenter have expressed, let's just say, distaste for how Resurrection turned out, with Curtis referring to it as a joke. For his part, Carpenter had this eloquent reaction to it. "Oh my God, oh Lord God, what the hell, I couldn't believe it." He speaks for plenty of us. If nothing else, then Halloween Resurrection always gives us horror fans plenty to laugh about whenever spooky season comes around. Indeed, in its own way, it's an unforgettable entry in the genre, so it will always have that going for it. And that's about as much as we can say for it. Also,
trick or treat, motherfucker.
In 2002, Halloween Resurrection seemed to close the door on the original film's run. It run out of gas and failed both critically with a 10% score on Rotten Tomatoes, as well as commercially, with it only bringing in $37 million on its $15 million budget. The next year would see Freddy and Jason clash with each other and Leatherface get the remake treatment from Studio Platinum Dunes. While Freddy and Jason would get their own remakes in 2009 and 2010 respectively, you know you can't keep a good mass villain down for long. So before his two main slasher rivals got their day in the sun, Michael Myers would receive his own remake that came out in 2007. With a drastically different take and a new producer behind the wheel, Halloween would get a chance to do something drastically different than anything we had seen before. Everyone will be entitled to one good scare as we find out what happened to Rob Zombie's Halloween.
Afraid you can't go home.
Why?
Because you've done terrible things.
As stated before, Resurrection did not do well with fans or critics when it came out in 2002. The Akkad family, who owns the rights and had very specific rules for the character, knew that he shouldn't be down for too long, even with the Laurie Strode storyline finally coming to a close. While we all know now that a certain musician and horror aficionado would eventually take the reins on the project, there were a ton of ideas that floated around first. There was a crossover like Michael's fellow slashers had already received, but this film would mix our silent stalker with the Cenobites from the Hellraiser series. Clive Barker himself agreed to write it, and there was an effort made to get Carpenter back in the director's chair. Barker was looking forward to exploring less a brawl between the characters and more an exploration of these two worlds and how they could be tied together. This would fall through as it was not seen to be profitable, particularly after internet polls claimed audiences just weren't into it. Other unmade ideas for the franchise include Halloween Bad Blood, which would bring back the Jamie Lloyd character that died in Part 6, Halloween Retribution, Halloween Asylum, and Halloween The Missing Years. Check out our WTF Unmade series for some on those. Retribution would bring back a different set of characters. Michael would kill off Busta Rhymes' Resurrection character and then face off against both Laurie's son, introduced in H2O, and former Haddonfield Sheriff Lee Brackett, who were both seeking revenge. That film was to end with John Tate drowning Michael in a frozen lake and claiming revenge for his mother, but going the Jamie Lloyd route by implying that Tate may be next to take on the mantle. Asylum would set up Michael serving a prison sentence for his crimes, but when he was to be executed while on death row, he would find a way to escape and wreak havoc. The Missing Years would take an even more extreme route, one that is also completely out of continuity, by having Michael back in Haddonfield during the events of Season of the Witch. Considering that movie doesn't even exist in the same reality of the other films, it's probably best that that film never saw the light of day. None of those made it very far into production, and while Mustafa Akkad and his son Malik were working on yet another idea featuring a character from the 6th movie, Mustafa tragically died as a result of injuries sustained during a bombing while he was attending a wedding in Jordan. Mustafa had been a producer on the first 8 films, and it was now up to his son to continue that legacy. After preparation was halted due to the tragedy, Malik would finally hand off the assignment while partnering with the mentioned films and the Weinstein brothers. The man chosen to take the reins on remaking one of the most hallowed horror films in history would be musician and writer-director Rob Zombie. Zombie, frontman of band White Zombie and later a solo artist, was always a fan of the horror genre. Hell, his band's name is a callback to the 1932 Bela Lugosi feature of the same name, and many of his music videos contain public domain horror, or are thematically in the horror realm. Zombie isn't a fan of remakes, especially horror, but after the success of his first two features, House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects, he was a solid name to give the Halloween franchise to, and decided to opt in. He even went to John Carpenter to let him know out of respect, and was surprised by the outcome. He was told that Carpenter really wasn't involved or interested in the franchise anymore, and that Zombie should make it his own. Filming took place in Pasadena and Los Angeles, the same place that Carpenter used to simulate Haddonfield, Illinois in the original, with a budget of $15 million. The cast was a mix of zombie regulars, horror legends, new faces, and even one returning member of the Halloween franchise. Faces like Bill Moseley, Sid Haig, William Forsythe, Ken Foree, and Sherry Moon Zombie had all worked with the director before. Dee Wallace, who would become a Carpenter regular, Malcolm McDowell, and Brad Dourif would add horror pedigree to their important titles, and two of them would come back to the sequel. The newer faces would be some of the most important roles of all, with Dave Ferg as a young Michael Myers, and Scout Taylor Compton as Laurie Strode. Compton actually beat out Danielle Panabaker for the role, and Panabaker would go on to take a lead role in the Friday the 13th remake a few years later. Compton was also the only cast member of The Girlfriends who was an actual teenager, just like Jamie Lee Curtis was in the first Halloween. With Compton secured as Laurie Strode and Ferg cast as the young Myers, the two other main driving forces would be played by Malcolm McDowell as a very different interpretation of Dr. Loomis, and Tyler Mane as the most imposing Myers that we would get on film. McDowell, of course, has had a legendary career, but Mane started off as a wrestler for the now-defunct WCW promotion, and was seen on screen as the first ever live-action Sabretooth for the Fox X-Men franchise in 2000. He would work with Zombie again on The Devil's Rejects before coming on board in back-to-back films as this version of the Boogeyman. Laurie's best friend on screen, Annie, would eventually be Compton's best friend in real life and played by Danielle Harris. Harris is that returning franchise actress that we discussed earlier, as she played Michael's niece Jamie in both parts 4 and 5 before the character was killed off in 6, sans Harris playing her. She wasn't sought out to come back and had to audition for the role, but was eager to shed her kid show image that she had pivoted to after Halloween 5. Rob Zombie amps up the violence and nudity to near grindhouse proportions, and Halloween is no different. Both Harris and actress Christina Klebb signed on knowing that nudity and gore-heavy scenes would be involved, and for Harris, this was a plus to shed the acting image that she had been branded with. The movie does follow the original storyline, but not until the second half of the runtime. That runtime, which amounts to 109 minutes in the theatrical cut and 121 in the director's cut, was the longest runtime of the series. The reason for the length is that Zombie had originally proposed a duology of sorts when offered the role of driving creative force for this remake. He wanted an entire movie that centered around young Michael and his origins, including the origins of the mask, followed by a proper remake of the movie. Zombie's intention was to truly show how Myers was a psychopath, and the only time that subject had ever been broached were in deleted or alternate scenes from the first two films, and the tie-in novelization of the first movie. While Zombie was turned down for that two-movie deal, he was able to work some of those ideas into the first half of his vision of Halloween, including the first instance of Michael speaking.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
With the making of Michael into a more specific psychopath, the body count was increased dramatically to 22, up from just 5 in the original. This includes all of his murders as a child, before he kills his sister, and the people he takes out on his way to Laurie. Unlike the first movie, we know immediately that Laurie is Michael's sister, and get to see how his family life was before he becomes the Shape 2. Zombie would have interference at almost every turn on production, and states that it was one of the most stressful shoots that he had ever been a part of. When he took the job directing a sequel, he assumed it couldn't be any worse than what he went through for the remake, but as we know, it was far worse for him on that production. The movie was not released in October like the original was, and was instead slated for an August release, so it didn't have to compete with what was the current horror juggernaut in the Saw series with Saw 4. Unfortunately, just days before Halloween was to be released theatrically, a work print version was leaked online. Zombie came out and assured audiences that it would be different than the final cut, and he was correct, with scenes being altered or cut altogether. The fear was that it may hurt the box office run, just like it was attributed to doing to Hostel Part 2, but the movie was still released as scheduled across more than 3,400 theaters, the most ever for the franchise. Halloween would be a financial hit, with it making $80 million off its $15 million budget, but was mostly hated by critics, and is still divisive with series fans. While most critics felt that it was overly crude or didn't offer anything new to the character or story, there were some that gave Zombie credit for making it his own, something that Carpenter told him to do before the first scene was even shot. The unrated cut was released on home video and also became a financial success, while offering a different look at the final product, with some scenes changing the story in ways that make it a very different movie, including an alternate ending. Zombie would go on to make Halloween 2 in 2009, but that is where the franchise would pause until David Gordon Green would unleash his own trilogy that forgets everything after the first film. While it made less than the remakes for Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, it also made way for their productions to even happen. Whether you like it or hate it, it's certainly a unique version of The Night He Came Home. And now you know what happened to Rob Zombie's Halloween.
Screwdriver, Mommy, you want a hammer? Look at this, Mom.
Lori!
I'm sorry. Okay.
A loud scream permeates the darkness, and a gunshot rings out. That's how Rob Zombie's Halloween ended. Michael Myers seemed to be dead, and Laurie Strode is left with a bunch of never-ending therapy bills after a single night where all of her friends were murdered, and she was forced to kill her big brother by shooting him in the face. Sounds like a night most would like to forget, and a filmmaking experience Rob Zombie would like to forget, according to reports of constant conflicts with the Weinsteins while making the film. Fucking Weinsteins. After Halloween was released, Zombie breathed a sigh of relief that his time on the franchise was behind him. Little did he know that only 1 year later, he was about to head back to Haddonfield. Let's find out what happened to Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 here on What the F*** Happened to This Horror Movie. Well, Zombie hasn't said a thing about his exact problems with the Weinsteins. Their track record is enough to send people running for the hills when asked to work with them again. But he would run into Dimension executive Matthew Stein at the Scream Awards and ask how the follow-up to Halloween was going. When Stein told Zombie of the pitches they were considering, he became agitated that they were going to destroy the vision he set forth when making the first one. After some thoughts and feelings of ownership of these characters, he decided to return for another run. Zombie began work on the script right away. Fans wondered if this film would follow in the footsteps of the original Halloween 2 by taking place in a hospital on the same night as the first movie. Zombie let them know right away that he had no intention of doing any sort of remake with this film. When talking with female.com.au, he told them, quote, "I would say that the first half of my Halloween is very much a Rob Zombie movie. Every single person I've ever talked to about the movie likes the first half better, and that was the part that was original. When it became a remake of the John Carpenter stuff, those were the parts people liked less." He also received the blessing from series producer and franchise gatekeeper Malik Akkad to go in any direction he wanted. His father, Mustafa Akkad, had a list of hardline rules about what could and couldn't be done with the franchise and character of Michael Myers. Malik had given Rob his blessing to ignore all these rules and go in any direction he wished. In Halloween 2, we pick up right where the first film left off. Michael has been shot, Laurie is covered in blood, and it turns out Loomis didn't die but is gravely injured. Laurie is walking down the road in a dazed and confused state. Sheriff Brackett finds her and takes her to the emergency room. His daughter, and Laurie's friend, Annie, and Loomis both end up at the hospital as well. Michael is presumed dead and loaded up in a van to be taken to the morgue. After an accident, Michael is jolted awake and escapes into the night. From here, we get a tease from Zombie that this is in fact going to follow along the original Halloween 2. Michael finds his way to the hospital and starts to kill anyone he can get his hands on, including Octavia Spencer. Do Ma and Halloween 2 take place in the same universe? That's a different video for a different time. After Michael makes his way through the hospital and finds Laurie, we're shown this has been a dream. In reality, it's 2 years later, and Laurie has been living with the Bracketts. With her adoptive family dead, and most of her friends killed, Laurie has been trying and failing to deal with her trauma. She seems to be lost with her life, and trying to find her way. Meanwhile, Loomis has gained some celebrity notoriety by writing another book about the incident. He has been on a big book tour, and has become obnoxious. In his new book, he reveals the secret that Laurie is in fact Angel Myers, and is Michael's sister. After learning this, Laurie once again spirals out of control and lashes out at Annie and Sheriff Brackett for not telling her any of this, even though they knew. Michael has been living in the woods, healing from the wounds he suffered in the last movie. Many fans seem to be upset there is never an explanation given on how Michael survived being shot in the face. Zombie just shrugs these complaints off, saying he could have been grazed. Makes about as much sense as anything else in the Halloween series that explains Michael's continued survival. When Halloween once again rolls around, Michael begins to see a vision of his dead mother along with a white horse. Really just an excuse for Zombie to get his wife into another movie. But here, she begins to tell Michael it's time to bring the family back together, and he starts his voyage back to Haddonfield. Once there, his killing spree continues as Laurie's new friends start to get picked off one by one. During this time, Laurie herself begins to have visions as well, suggesting a psychic connection to her brother. While it may not be intentional, this reminds fans of the same thing happening to Jamie Lloyd in Halloween 5. Danielle Harris shoutout for both of these films. Eventually, the news of Michael's return reaches Loomis, who feels regret for what he has become, and returns to face Michael once again to end everything for good. While Zombie was feeling good about returning to the franchise, he was hit with reality just one day before filming started. 2 weeks of shooting time was slashed from the schedule. This caused Zombie to cut scenes out of the movie as the production began to reshuffle its schedule. Another blow came when post-production time was cut, after the Weinstein Company announced that Halloween 2 would be coming out in August 2009 rather than October. This undercut the time needed to edit the film and move Halloween 2 out of the logical release slot that a movie titled Halloween should be released in. Fucking Weinsteins. Even with these problems, production moved ahead in Georgia. The first film had been filmed in California, making it easy to predict the weather and thus able to keep the shooting schedule on time. With an already limited schedule due to the cuts, the production had to fight with rainy weather on a regular basis. Shooting days would have to move indoors during this time, and some scenes had to be tweaked to accommodate weather conditions on the fly. With an already tight schedule, things went further over schedule when some of the film's canisters were accidentally X-rayed at the airport as they were sent off for developing. This completely ruined the footage, and everything had to be reshot from scratch. At one point, the state's ATF department showed up to shut down production after a false claim was made that it was an unsafe working environment. This led to lost time on the already super tight production schedule. Rob Zombie's regular, Bill Moseley, got so frustrated with things that after one day of work, he quit. Then they had to scramble to find another actor to fill the role he was playing. Jeff Daniel was put in that role, even though he was already playing another character in the film. While not going into specifics, Zombie himself even alleged that certain individuals were stealing money from the film's budget. All of these things combined seemed to indicate that not only was this production also a terrible working experience, but was even worse than it was on the set of the first film. While doing an interview with Forbes in 2019, Zombie reflected on his time working on the Halloween films and working with the Weinstein Company. Quote, "Making Halloween with the Weinsteins was a miserable experience for me, and so I was very reticent to do the second one. I did do the second one, and I thought, okay, well the first one was a miserable experience, but it did well, so maybe it'll be easier the second time. It was worse. Oh my God. I felt like they weren't trusting me on the first one because they wanted to make sure it was a hit, and now they weren't trusting me not to fuck up their hit. They would show me scenes from Halloween to try and make a point, and I'd be like, yeah, I know, I made that movie. Why do you show me that like I've never seen it before? An interesting tidbit from that interview suggests there is a documentary he had made during the making of the second film that shows how messed up the shoot was. Quote, "We made a behind-the-scenes documentary for the making of Halloween. That has somehow gotten lost in the vaults. That shows how messed up everything was and what was going on when we were making those movies. No matter your thoughts on the film, I think we can all agree we want to see that documentary." When it comes to the actual film, fans were excited to see what Rob Zombie would bring to the table. Since the first film was a reimagining of Halloween, Zombie was beholden to the events of the original 1978 film. No matter what he put at the beginning, if we didn't eventually see Michael Myers in a white Shatner mask and dark blue overalls stalking babysitters on Halloween night, we the fans would have had a meltdown. Now with the sequel, the chains were off, and he could go in any direction he wanted. While there is some merit to the idea of seeing Halloween 2 1981 being reimagined, having a fresh path blazed before us was exciting. Where would Zombie take this idea? We were going to see what an original Halloween sequel would look like from his mind. What we ended up with left some fans cold. Zombie's Dr. Loomis did differentiate himself in the first movie from the original's portrayal by Donald Pleasance, but the character became a horrible egomaniac in this sequel. Sure, in the first film, he didn't seem to work as a doctor who declares a lifelong quest to keep Michael locked up, as we had seen in the original franchise. Wanting to do something different is understandable, but without the Loomis we all know and love, the films lose their heart. While many fans may feel this way, Zombie has a different take on it. During an episode of Mick Garris's podcast Postmortem, he stated, quote, "I had started writing Dr. Loomis as still the avenging guy. I was like, this is ridiculous. He's some doctor. He's not going to run around with a magnum shooting people. This is absurd. Then I decided, we'll just make him like Dr. Phil."
I don't want to talk to you.
Why not?
That's despicable. I don't want to talk to you. You can go.
If you think I exploit people, every time you bring a guest on this show, you exploit them and spread whatever problems they have to the whole world.
Well, the mystery of why Michael turned from a young boy to a killing machine was absent from Zombie's first film. Adding in visions of his mother telling him what to do and where to go set it so far off track. None of these visions were in the first film, which throws off his motivations. Things like this seem more in line with the Friday the 13th films than the Halloween franchise.
Jason, my special boy. Do you know what your gift is? No matter what they do to you, you cannot die.
The White Horse has also confused fans. In the first film, we do see a young Michael take a white horse toy and destroy it with a baseball bat during the film's end credits. Some thought this might be significant to what it might mean to Michael in his visions. After his mother brings a similar toy to Michael during a flashback to the institution at the beginning of the second film, there was a lot of chatter online that it symbolizes his innocence and that the color of white shows his pure self, blah, 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 blah. In reality, according to Zombie, it means nothing. Talking to Scream magazine, he said, quote, "The white horse does have significant meaning, but it could have been anything. She could have given him a fire engine. People misunderstood the white horse. It was just meant to signify his childhood memory. Could have been any object, but I thought that was particularly cinematic. I really want to see the visions that had his mom being followed around by a fire engine." As with the first film, Rob Zombie was given a director's cut on home video. Well, it seems he tried to kill off Michael Myers in the first film. To keep there from being sequels, he doubled down here. His original ending is part of the director's cut for part 2. In the end, Michael stabs Loomis to death and then gets taken down in a hail of bullets by the police. After Laurie says goodbye to her brother, she dons his mask and races out the door of the shack with his knife in her hand. She is also killed by the police. Then it cuts to the same shot from the theatrical cut where she is sitting in a sanitarium looking at her biological mother and young brother with the white horse as Love Hurts plays over the end credits. In the theatrical cut, Laurie survives the standoff with police, but we still have that final shot seeming to indicate while she survived, she has lost her battle mentally and has finally joined her brother in seeking revenge on the world that wronged them and took her family away from her. In the director's cut, this indicates that this is what she sees as she lays dying. She is reunited with her family in death. Zombie considers the director's cut finale as the real ending. The Weinstein Company obviously wanted to keep the reimagining franchise going, so they made him reshoot it with what ended up being in the theatrical cut. While they tried to move on to a Halloween 3, even considering a Halloween 3D at one point, It never happened, and the rights eventually reverted back to Universal Studios, who tapped Blumhouse to bring us the 2018 sequel, Halloween. Really? Now there are 3 films from the franchise that just have the name Halloween. Somehow, this is still the Weinsteins' fault. Fucking Weinsteins.
The history of the Halloween film franchise is a long and winding one. When you consider the many sequels and reboots the classic John Carpenter original spawned, it's hard to think of another movie series that has so consistently reinvented itself, which in and of itself is exceptional when you recognize that, at its core, it's a very simple premise. Evil incarnate grabs a knife and starts hacking away at every person he sees. In 2018, we got a fresh look at this reliably compelling story when Universal Pictures and Blumhouse released David Gordon Green's Halloween, a movie that completely did away with all the famous Halloween lore, save for what was revealed in the original film. Horror movie fans have been waiting a long time to see the shape get back into the stab of things, and with the grimy memories of Rob Zombie's 2 movies long in the past, we were all ready for a killer new take on the legend of Michael Myers. So how did we arrive at a place where we were going all the way back to the original film for inspiration? Well folks, sharpen your knives and hide your candy, because we're taking a look at what the f*** happened to 2018's Halloween.
Happy Halloween, Michael.
Following the dismal reception of Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 in 2009, it was clear Michael Myers needed some new blood in his veins. A proposed 3rd movie in the rebooted franchise was announced soon after the release of H2, though Zombie was not going to be involved. Instead, the drive-angry duo of Patrick Lussier and Todd Farmer were enlisted to make Halloween 3D. But that fell apart for various reasons, including budget disputes and a script that was never quite ready. Several years went by as several attempts to reboot the franchise came and went, including one called Halloween Returns, which was going to be made by Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunstan, the writers behind the Feast movies and several Saw sequels. When Halloween Returns was shut down, the franchise fell into limbo. Dimension Films, the Weinstein brothers-founded horror studio, lost the rights to the title, and it looked as though we wouldn't see Michael Myers cut another swath through Haddonfield for a great many years. Then in May of 2015, Blumhouse walloped the horror world with a major announcement. They were now in control of the Halloween franchise. Not only that, the legend himself, John Carpenter, was returning as an executive producer, many years after seemingly washing his hands of the series. So then the question became, who was going to direct this Halloween? Some interesting names were initially in the mix. Mike Flanagan, who was still an up-and-coming director at the time, having impressed horror hounds with his films Oculus, Hush, and Ouija Origin of Evil, was in the running, though his flirtation with making Halloween never became more than that. He later explained that he had no real pitch for it, although he did think of making Dr. Loomis a female at one point, and in the end he was glad that he wasn't entrusted with the franchise. He did, however, say that Hush was basically his riff on the first Halloween, so in a way he felt like he did get to do his take on it after all. Another name associated with the reboot was Adam Wingard, who was coming off You're Next and The Guest. Wingard revealed in an interview that when he found out Blumhouse was making a new Halloween, he chased after the property thanks to his love for the original. But the deal was never done, and in hindsight, Wingard admitted that, not unlike Mike Flanagan, he'd already done a riff on Halloween, his version being The Guest. That said, when he was still in the running to do it, Wingard received an email from John Carpenter, who gave the director his full support and fully backed him as a potential helmer. For Wingard, that was almost even better than directing the picture. With those 2 names out of the running, a surprise out-of-left-field name came almost 2 full years after the Blumhouse announcement. They'd found their man. Well, men. David Gordon Green and Danny McBride. Not 2 names very closely associated with horror, were revealed to be the key creatives behind the new Halloween film. The announcement was actually made by John Carpenter himself on his Facebook page, along with teasing that he was considering doing the music for the film. Spoiler alert, he did indeed end up scoring the movie, For their part, Green and McBride pitched their take directly to Carpenter, as obviously he was the only person that they felt that they had to impress, and Carpenter was blown away by said pitch, which set the new film up as a direct sequel to the 1978 classic. All other lore would be ignored, including the notion that Michael Myers was a sibling to the ultimate final girl, Laurie Strode. Also announced was a release date for the film, an appropriate mid-October debut in 2018, about a year and a half later, giving the boys plenty of time to work on the script. The next big question then became, would Laurie Strode return to face her tormentor? Green and McBride alleged they wrote 80 drafts of the film over the course of just 8 months, even rewriting well into production. McBride would later say that they wanted the script to be as good as possible in order to convince Jamie Lee Curtis to return to the role that started it all for her. They focused heavily on the Laurie character to be a strong, though damaged protagonist, turning the one-time babysitter into a tormented survivalist who just knows the Shape will come back to town to finish what he started. Intriguingly, one original plan was to shoot 2 films back-to-back, but that was scuttled when it was decided that it would be better to see what worked and what didn't on the first one. Ultimately, 2 more films would go on to be made, but those didn't get the green light until after the first one was released into theaters. Once Curtis got her hands on the script, she was thoroughly impressed with what Green and McBride had conjured up. There was no way she could pass up returning to Haddonfield, especially considering the new film would come out 40 years after the original. Green would allow Curtis to bring her own ideas to the screenplay, as is his process with all his actors, so the original final girl had final say on how this Laurie shaped up. Also returning to the fold was Nick Castle, who portrayed the Shape in Carpenter's original. While he would only be in a handful of scenes in the new one, with stuntman James Jude Courtney taking on the lion's share of Michael Myers' role, Castle's involvement was a clear indicator that the filmmakers were taking the job of reviving Halloween very seriously. Someone who would not be returning to the franchise was Danielle Harris, who portrayed Laurie's daughter Jamie Lloyd in Halloween 4 and 5, as well as showing up in Rob Zombie's 2 Halloween films. Harris had even reached out to the filmmakers when she heard about the new movie, especially considering Laurie's daughter was going to be a key character in the new film, but her efforts to be involved were rebuffed by the creatives, who were obviously committed to ignoring the events of all the other Halloween sequels. Instead of Harris, Judy Greer was cast as Laurie's skeptical daughter Karen, who obviously had nothing to do with Jamie Lloyd. For the role of Laurie's granddaughter Allison, a slew of actresses auditioned, without the knowledge that they were even trying out for a role in the new Halloween. Eventually, Andi Matichak would get the role, and when she figured out who she'd be playing, she studied Jamie Lee Curtis's performance from the original, which was apropos since Matichak would actually earn the same and introducing credit that Curtis received in that film. Early drafts had the film open with something of a recreation of the end of the original film. They were even going to have a Dr. Loomis cameo, the character who had been played by Green's art director, who apparently looked exactly like Donald Pleasance, with a few makeup appliances. But the idea was scrapped when Carpenter told Green and McBride that it wasn't necessary to revive the ending of the original, that it would be better to just drop the audience into their own movie. Though Halloween had plenty of heavy hitters behind it, it still ended up feeling much in the independent spirit of the original. Production only had 25 days of filming on the schedule, a fairly quick turnaround for such a major title, and a budget of only about $10 million, which is in keeping with the Blumhouse model of making movies. Green chose to look at the low budget and short schedule as blessings in disguise, figuring he could turn his limitations into opportunities the same way Carpenter did when he made his low budget masterpiece. Shooting took place in Charleston, South Carolina, where Green and McBride had made their HBO series Vice Principals. It was originally supposed to go in front of cameras in October of 17, but got delayed until January of 2018, which did not affect the planned October release. Filming wrapped a month later in February, though production ramped up again, albeit it briefly, in June when reshoots were required. The iconic Michael Myers mask was crafted by makeup artist Christopher Nelson, who made life casts of James Jude Courtney's face in order to ensure that the mask would perfectly fit him. The mask had been sitting around for 40 years, so obviously it was designed to look beaten and weathered by the passage of time. Courtney said that his Michael's movements were partially inspired by his cat, as Green wanted the Shape to have an efficiency of movement the way a cat does when it's hunting. Halloween was released on October 19, 2018, and it opened with quite a bang, making a very impressive $77 million in its opening weekend in the United States. Ultimately, it ended up making over $255 million worldwide. Unsurprisingly, this would not be the final word on Michael Myers. As previously mentioned, 2 more Halloween films with the same creative team were announced, ensuring the shape would keep on slashing for a while, even though dude was in his 60s. Regardless what you think of his trilogy, one must admit that David Gordon Green brought fresh attention to one of the most beloved franchises of all time, if nothing else shining a light on the 1978 classic that started it all. Let the fans decide which of the timelines they prefer, because there sure are plenty to choose from. And that, my friends, is what the f happened to Halloween 2018.
I can't do it! I'm sorry, I can't do it!
Gotcha.
Imagine ignoring most of the Halloween franchise and making a direct sequel to the original, and it bringing in nearly $260 million at the box office. It was a pretty ballsy decision that could have pissed off fans, but ultimately it paid off. And it seemed like the sky was the limit for David Gordon Green and company. But then one phrase echoed out from the cold, dark night. Evil dies tonight. With a swath of returning characters, a hospital-bedridden Laurie Strode. Wait, haven't we done this before? Oh well. And Michael somehow making it out of that fiery death trap at the end of 2018. This is what the f happened to Halloween Kills. Originally, Halloween Kills was actually intended to be shot back-to-back with Halloween 2018. They had developed an idea with writer Jeff Fradley that was first envisioned to be 2 movies, but then they realized they actually had enough material for a trilogy. But writer Danny McBride thought it better that they not get too ahead of themselves. They wanted to see what worked and what didn't about their 2018 film, and more importantly, make sure that people actually liked it. Once that film was a massive success, it was a go for the second film in their proposed trilogy. Joining McBride and director David Gordon Green on writing duties was Scott Teems, who was already developing multiple scripts with Blumhouse. He got to work on a script from an idea from McBride and Green, and they'd eventually do rewrites as well. Jamie Lee Curtis, Judy Greer, and Andy Matichek were announced as returning to their roles, with an announcement video releasing in July of 2019, which revealed both the titles and release dates for the sequels, Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. It was originally announced that Kills and Ends would be filmed back-to-back, stop me if you've heard that one before, but instead was cut back to just the first sequel, as the shoot was said to be very intense. Plus this little thing called COVID happened. They originally planned on filming Kills in Charleston, South Carolina, just like 2018, but instead production shifted to North Carolina due to the tax incentives no longer being available in South Carolina. It also helped that Screen Gem Studios was located there and had massive stages ready to use. Ultimately, they remade the Myers house on the soundstage and were able to use the hospital set that was originally built for the Swamp Thing TV series. They decided to follow in the tradition of the original Halloween 2 and follow up on the same night as Halloween 2018. Therefore, there would be plenty of returning characters, outside of the Strodes. One person that was a bit surprising to return was Will Patton's Hawkins, who was seemingly killed by Dr. Sartan in a pretty definitive way. But Green liked working with Patton so much, and the audience enjoyed him too, so he decided to bring him back. Though much like Laurie, he'd be spending much of the film bedridden. But it wasn't just characters from 2018 that would be brought back, as the creatives looked towards who to bring back from the original film. Paul Rudd was approached to reprise his Halloween 6 The Curse of Michael Myers role as Tommy Doyle, but was said to have to decline due to commitments with Ghostbusters Afterlife. Though, can you imagine if he had returned? Especially since they had already wiped all the films except the original film from the canon? Rudd's return would have opened up a whole new can of worms. Instead, they cast Anthony Michael Hall in the role after he had a very productive meeting with Green. And if you're going to bring back Tommy Doyle, you may as well bring back Lindsay Wallace. But unlike Doyle, the filmmakers were able to bring back the original actress, Kyle Richards. Richards had long since left the world of acting, but was still a prominent figure on TV due to being in the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Nancy Stevens, who plays Nurse Marion alongside Dr. Loomis in the original film's opening, would also return. And while getting considerably less screen time than some of the other legacy characters, Charles Cypher's Lee Brackett would also make a brief but memorable appearance.
It's Halloween. Everyone's entitled to one good scare.
One surprising return would be that of Dr. Samuel Loomis. While Donald Pleasance had long since passed, Tom Jones Jr. would step into the role since he shared a resemblance to the man. Funnily enough, Jones Jr. was actually head of carpentry on the films. His voice would be dubbed over by Colin Mahan. James Jude Courtney would return to the role of The Shape, while stuntman Aaron Armstrong would take over for flashbacks. Nick Castle would also return for a select scene where Myers shows up in a bathroom, as he was considered a good luck charm by producer Ryan Turek. We even get a scene that involves the police hunt for Michael after the original film. And the original script actually had even more scenes set in 1978, and a young Laurie Strode would have been prominent. Fortunately for us, it was decided that Curtis was too important as the character, that they couldn't cast someone else for her younger version, and they didn't have the budget to de-age her. We also would have found out that young Hawkins, who accidentally shoots his partner in the neck instead of Michael, actually did so because he was drunk, having found out that his girlfriend was cheating on him. Ultimately, those scenes were cut from the final script, but we would still receive several scenes set in 1978, which required the building of the original Myers house. This was all done in a warehouse, with 6 houses being built in total. Since they also had scenes taking place in 2018 at the house, that required it to be dressed completely different depending on the decade. And with 78 being showcased, it also meant they needed to recreate the classic Myers mask. Effects guru Christopher Nelson constantly used the original Don Post mask as a source, and was able to make a damn near exact replica. As for the present-day mask, Nelson added some fire damage, but kept much of the same look from 2018. In fact, they only used 2 masks during filming, the hero mask and the one used for the fire scenes. Despite his fiery finale at the end of 2018, it would be revealed that Michael Myers had escaped relatively unscathed, and taken out a slew of firefighters in the process. Since they were no longer filming in the same location, they actually had to burn down a different house for the shoot, and the firefighters were actually made up of mostly real-life firefighters from the area, who could not be more excited to get killed by the Shape.
Evil dies tonight!
Ended up being the mantra of the angry mob in the film, dead set on finding Michael Myers and putting an end to his rampage. It's one of the more divisive elements of the film, and can feel a bit like a detour from everything else going on in the movie. But Green really wanted to focus on the effect that Michael would have on the community, and the mob mentality of it all.
Tonight's tragedy, an eerie reminder of an event in Haddonfield history this community has spent decades trying to forget.
A broadcast shown at the local bar in the film goes through Michael's victims from 78, including Annie, Linda, and Bob. Hilariously, the production wasn't able to get a hold of a high school photo of actor John Michael Graham, who originally portrayed Bob, and during their search, they actually found one of actor Bob Odenkirk, which bore a striking resemblance to the man. Green asked Bob's manager and he approved the photo, making it one of the stranger cameos in the film. We would also see the return of the Silver Shamrock masks, being worn by a group of kids and later used in one of Michael's art projects. During the sequence where Michael attacks the car, the production took an unorthodox approach to filming. They would use 2 separate units, one filming the actors in the front and one filming the actors in the back. This allowed them to shoot at a much faster pace, though it certainly wasn't easy to pull off. Kyle Richards actually broke her nose during the scene, which was something that she kept secret from the crew, as she didn't want to be replaced with a stunt double for the action moments. For the moment that Laurie is brought into the hospital for surgery, they hired an actual surgery team who performed a fake one on the prosthetic on Curtis's stomach. Since they were real doctors and nurses, the filmmakers asked them to provide insight and shape the scene, versus trying to get them to perform a scene from the script. Green would take a documentary approach to filming it. Then the final major sequence, where Michael is attacked on the street by the angry mob and then turns the tables on them, was shot half on the streets of Wilmington and half on a soundstage. They would place the performers on a turntable, which gave the sequence a dreamlike effect. The night shoots made for a very tough filming schedule. In fact, it even resulted in director of photography Michael Simmons getting vertigo and having to be in a wheelchair for a week of the production. Thankfully, camera operator Paul Daly was able to step in as DP and maintain a similar look until Simmons was able to fully return. Universal's home video department asked for an extended cut of the film, which would feature some more violent kills. But one of the major changes was with the ending. Originally, the film was going to end with Laurie taking the knife and heading out through the hospital on a mission. But Green decided against it, and instead ended the theatrical version of the film with Laurie in her hospital room and Michael staring at the camera after killing Karen. But Green was able to utilize his originally conceived ending for the extended version, though it definitely makes ends a bit more confusing. John Carpenter would return to score the film alongside his son Cody Carpenter and Daniel Davies. It featured familiar beats to 2018, but with just enough change to make it its own. Halloween Kills was originally going to release on October 16, 2020, but due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the film was delayed a whole year. But that's not all that was changed with the release, as it would come to theaters as well as on Peacock on the exact same day. It eventually released on October 15, 2021, and would bring in nearly $50 million on its opening weekend. The film would end its run at $133 million worldwide, considerably less than its predecessor. Whether it was due to the Peacock release or bad word of mouth is anyone's guess. Critically, Kills fared much worse than 2018, garnering a 38% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, considerably worse than the 79% fresh that Halloween 2018 managed. But the wheels were already in motion for another entry, and fans hoped that they would avoid some of the same issues that plagued Kills, like the whole Evil Dies Tonight plot. And as we all know, Halloween Ends had no controversy at all. Nope, none. And despite the general annoyance with Kills, I'll always get a kick out of it for its high body count and focus on having a bloody good time. Plus, it doesn't get better than when that Carpenter score kicks in. Oh yes. And that, my friends, is what the happened to Halloween Kills.
Evil dies tonight! God damn it, Brackett!
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.
Why are you dressed so scary? It's Halloween.
It's Halloween, everyone!
Halloween is cool.
We're gonna have a good time tonight. Or are we?
It's Halloween. We're gonna have a good time tonight.
Today's film, depending on how you look at it, was either a promise unfulfilled,
Emotional, damn it!
or a unique take on a classic horror character. Hell, to some of us, it was just a giant Michael Myers-sized slap to the face.
Oh, wow!
Using his good hand.
I better use my strong hand.
It's the story of a writer and director with plot ADHD trying to make something profound.
Yes, 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 no, no!
Or perhaps just flat out bored of the sandbox that he'd been playing in since 2018.
Goodbye, Michael.
The journey includes an actress promising to anger fans,
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
bad test screening rumors, Michael Myers doing whatever the hell this is in a sewer, and the final fight ever between Michael Myers and Laurie Strode. Or at least between Myers and Jamie Lee Curtis. It's a story of anticipation, confusion, and Corey mother-effing Cunningham. Of spaghetti-stained milk glasses,
Boys who keep secrets don't get custard for dessert.
and a possible Halloween 3 Season of the Witch connection. This is what the happened to Halloween Ends. After the ending of Halloween Kills, it seemed obvious where the franchise was headed for its 13th installment in the finale of the David Gordon Green trilogy. Our last shot of kills, after all, at least in the extended version, was Laurie mean-mugging her way out of the hospital on her way to avenge her daughter and half of Haddonfield's deaths. The theatrical ending of Halloween Kills even featured Michael answering the phone in dead Karen's pocket, with Laurie hearing his hot breath on the other end of the line.
I'm coming for you, Michael.
It wasn't too difficult to figure out where the story should be heading, and rumors were abound that Halloween Ends' story would take place on that very same night. But as they had done many times throughout the trilogy, David Gordon Green and co-writer Danny McBride threw a curveball instead. Halloween Ends would take place 4 years after the events of Halloween Kills. There had been ideations about where the franchise would quote-unquote end, but the constantly changing interests of writers were only exacerbated by the pandemic delaying both sequels a year.
He's waited for me. I've waited for him.
Where we landed after months and months of tinkering was with Green and McBride writing a script full of wild ideas.
Imagination.
So many ideas that they had to hire fresh-faced writers Paul Brad Logan and Chris Bernier to tame and organize them all. Paul Brad Logan would end up writing a fascinating novelization of the film that featured extra scenes, including Michael's murder of 2 city sanitation workers, as well as some much-needed depth around some of the unexplained ideas of the movie, such as what really happened between Michael and Corey in that sewer chokedown scene. While fans were gearing up for an all-out slugfest between Laurie and Michael, as well as satisfying answers to the questions asked in 2018 and Kills, Green had his heart set on a love story.
I'll see you in hell.
And to some, this was the equivalent of handing out math equations on Halloween in lieu of candy. Green also wanted to explore the idea of a secluded community member becoming a psychopathic killer.
I killed someone.
He also wanted to explore in further detail the collateral damage of the decades-long battle between Laurie and Michael on Haddonfield.
See what he did to my sister? She cannot speak because of you.
He also wanted to tell a coming-of-age story that harkened back to John Carpenter's Carrie. And a dance scene. At this point, it became necessary to create an entirely new character to harbor all of Green and McBride's desired story themes and ideas.
You think you can fix me, but you can't. I'll spare you the heartache.
Enter Corey Cunningham.
Corey, you're a lifesaver.
While this route was clearly going to upset fans, John Carpenter praised the writers for their willingness to not rehash the same stories that had come before, and this was all the blessing they needed to move forward with their auteur vision for the white-faced horror of Haddonfield, or at least what was left of him by the time the script was finished. Important surviving characters from Kills would return, including, of course, Jamie Lee Curtis, at a clip of $3.5 million.
That makes you want to rip off your shirt and show grief your and say, you know what? Let's go.
She'd be joined by a swooning Will Patton as a sheriff who just wants to see some effing cherry blossoms.
Who knows? Maybe I'll fly over for the cherry blossoms.
And the lovable Andy Matichak as Allison. Allison's character had been the true coming-of-age story to this point, forged by the fire of Michael, Laurie, and Haddonfield's craziness. But she too is on the verge of breaking, which pushes her right into the arms of Mr. I'll light the match Cunningham.
I'll light the match.
The role of Corey went to actor Rowan Campbell, who will actually be playing Billy in the upcoming Silent Night Deadly Night remake. After beating out hundreds of others who had auditioned for the role, none of which were told that it was for an upcoming Halloween film.
Just wanted it to be a fun night, and then it all went bad.
And listen, Campbell did a great job as Corey and was not at all to blame for the peculiar route that the story took.
My disappointment is immeasurable.
But if you're wondering if the production knew how things were about to go down, both Green and Curtis warned him before accepting the role that there would likely be massive fan outrage over his character. Hell, Curtis stoked the fan flames before production had even begun, telling news outlets that the film would be shocking and make people very angry. Though fans were very happy to have James Jude Courtney return to don the mask, he made things even more peculiar when he called the final fight between the two, quote-unquote, erotic.
Right.
Though she wasn't originally slated to return, Kyle Richards reprised her role as Lindsay due to fan demand after an impressive performance in Kills. And let's not forget the all-time legend Nick Castle, who both returned in a cameo as a partygoer
See anything you like?
and provided Michael's all-important breathing. After some pandemic delays and false starts, filming on Halloween Ends finally began in January of 2022 in Savannah, Georgia, under the working title Cave Dweller. Academy Award winner Christopher Nelson returned to handle the guts and gore, as well as provide some continuity to his excellent mask work in 2018 and in Kills.
I'll guarantee you when you walk on set, people see you, and we get the shot, it's going to be worth it.
Nelson decided to add on to the ever-growing personality of Michael's mask by crafting a mask that reflected his damaged psychological state at the time. The mask's physical appearance told the tale of both Michael's battle scars and where he had been, rotting in a sewer under Haddonfield for years. Nelson always revisited the original 1978 mask as his North Star, making sure that the new iteration still connected to the original look. Say what you want about David Gordon Green's trilogy, but it's hard to find someone who will complain about Nelson's work on the franchise, whether it be his use of practical effects to create ultra-gnarly carnage, or the way he carefully managed Michael Myers' mask through 3 films. The same could be said for James Jude Courtney's makeup and costume.
Said Michael Myers. This is Mike Myers. It should be the Halloween mask. This is a Halloween mask. No, the killer dude from Halloween.
The actor let Nelson's depiction of his bodily scars and burn wounds inform his performance in both his movements and psyche. When it came to the final showdown between Michael and Laurie, James Jude Courtney and Jamie Lee Curtis were both hell-bent on making the fight as emotionally cathartic as possible. Courtney did his own stunt work as usual, and Curtis insisted that they let her do as much as possible.
She took a freaking beating, and so did I.
The two allegedly began weeping together as they talked through the fight scene step by step before filming. Courtney said that both he and Curtis agreed it was the most powerful scene she had ever done.
Time we feel like we might be pushing her too hard, she'd just be like, no, let's do this.
Someone's never seen the dance scene from True Lies. Courtney also called the scene a violent emotional release. And yeah, for some reason he called it erotic.
What did he say?
Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
The fight scene went through a lot of effort and changes, not unlike the ending of the film as a whole. Halloween Ends finished filming in March of 2022, with 4 days of reshoots to be completed a month later. Then it was time for test screenings, which had become a thing of lore in David Gordon Green's trilogy over the years. Each of the 2 movies to this point had endings changed by test screenings, and Ends would be no different. Rumors from those screenings spread like wildfire through the Halloween community, much of it misinformation from attention-thirsty social media accounts, though some of it would turn out to be true.
Psych!
David Gordon Green explained that after test screenings, they added the entire funeral procession, where Michael is turned into hamburger helper in front of the entire town. They did so because they and the test audiences themselves felt the original, more intimate ending lacked a grand finale. This was filmed just 4 months before the film's premiere. Then there was the constant back and forth about what to do with our characters after Michael was quote-unquote dead. The ending of Ends wasn't always cherry blossoms and memoirs. Different ideations of the film and possible endings included Laurie dying in the final fight or becoming infected with Michael's curse. In one, her eyes became dark as Michael was incinerated. She would later attack Allison and slam the door on the audience. essentially becoming Michael herself to close out the trilogy. Other possible endings also feature different fates for both Corey and Allison. One of my favorites is Christopher Nelson's description of an ending that featured a Halloween 3 Season of the Witch tie-in that would show a Silver Shamrock factory mass-producing Michael Myers masks. He also mentioned that the masks seen throughout the film, including the Scarecrow mask donned by Corey, were to be official Silver Shamrock masks. This ending would have been insanely out there and probably kind of rad, but it may not have played well with those uninitiated in Season of the Witch lore, which, by the way, is why the font in the credits is italicized and blue. It's a callback to the third film in the Halloween franchise, one that featured even less Michael Myers than Ends does. Much less. John Carpenter returned with, of course, another banger of a score alongside his son Cody Carpenter and Daniel Davies.
I thought it would be perfect for the movie.
There's also original music from the group Boy Harsher that fits the tone of Ends with ease. What didn't go over with ease was David Gordon Green's interpretation of how to finish off the Halloween franchise in the eyes of fans who had been anticipating it for years. When Halloween Ends debuted in October of 2022, it was met at the door with frustration and bewilderment. Instead of a straightforward ending to the story of Michael Myers and Laurie Strode, again, for now, fans were treated to a love story, a goofy subplot about an unruly child going splat on Halloween, and a kid who was bullied by band geeks now tag teaming with Michael Myers, who, by the way, was in a cave for half of the movie and was only brought to life by awkwardly gyrating as he stabbed a guy. And let's not forget that we were forced to watch Michael take a one-on-one ass beating from a teenager. Some respected the wild swings and the weirdness of it all, but most were more pissed off than the iron-wielding lady from Halloween Kills. And critics were no different. The film sits with a 40% and 57% rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes and features a litany of complaints about the confusing choices made in the film. Halloween Ends would garner a worldwide theatrical haul of $105 million on a $33 million budget. Not bad for a film that released day and date on the streaming app Peacock. The company also reported that the film had made a massive dent there, becoming the most streamed content over a 2-day period ever on the app. This did, however, attribute to a near record 88% dip for the film in week 2 at the theaters. I'm sure the quality of the film didn't help. If you're wondering if Halloween Ends and all of its controversy was truly the end of Michael, I can assure you it was not. Just the end of Blumhouse playing in the Shaped sandbox. No, it was made very clear to many people by the late longtime Hollywood producer Mustafa Akkad that Michael was never to be officially killed off. You could stop him for a while, but you can never kill him. Though we don't know exactly what the future holds for the white-faced jerk, there was recently a bidding war for the TV rights to the franchise won by Miramax, who's said to be developing a Halloween series that again promises to be a creative reset that harkens back to the original film. So it's safe to say that Michael Myers will return. We just don't know when, other than in video game form next September. And that, my friends, is what the fuck happened to Halloween Ends.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.